This is the Cowboy State Daily Morning Show with Jake. The new way Wyoming wakes up. Cowboy State Daily Show with Jake. It's Monday. And we've got a lot to get to from over the weekend and more. Those affected by the Elk Fire try to return to some level of normalcy 4 weeks after that wildfire forced people from their homes. Could cloud seeding have been any kind of an answer to the two major wildfires in Wyoming? Thousands of bison get the boot from Yellowstone. What to do with them now? Rock Springs, it's on the verge of collapse. Haunted Wyoming continues with Sweetwater Library and plenty of other places in the Cowboy State that are spooky. And a former footballer with the Wyoming Cowboys turned pro with the Cincinnati Bengals remains a Casper boy at heart. Logan Wilson talked to our own Renee Jean. These stories and so much more coming up on the Cowboy State Daily Morning Show with Jake, Monday edition. It's time for Wendy Core and top of the hour news.
It's time to take a look at what's happening around Wyoming for Monday, October 28th. I'm Wendy Core, bringing you headlines from the Cowboy State Daily Newsroom, brought to you by 4 Wyoming PAC. 4 Wyoming PAC says this November, Wyoming will vote to allow residential homes to be taxed at a lower, fairer rate, even the playing field, and give families a much-needed break. 4 Wyoming PAC wants you to vote yes on Amendment A. There are too many bison in Yellowstone National Park. That's what Yellowstone's Bison Program Manager reports. Over 6,000 of them, actually, and plans are to remove more than 1,300 over the winter in order to keep the herd within population ranges established by the Interagency Bison Management Plan. But wildlife advocates believe the long-term ecology of Yellowstone's bison management is jeopardized by short-term decisions to cull the herds, which are perceived as political rather than scientific. That's according to Cowboy State Daily's Andrew Rossi.
The concerns are that, as the expert we're gradually domesticating bison because we're keeping them confined to this space where their gene pool is being diluted because don't have the ability to expand into their historic range. So we're losing a part of the bison's wild nature because of this management plan. And that's not the fault of the National Park Service for implementing it. It's because of the conflicts outside the park that the bison would inevitably run into.
Through the work of the National Park Service, tribal partners, and conservation groups like the Montana Wild Bison Coalition, there are possible solutions to address this urgent issue. The stakes are high, as the consequence is losing wild bison forever. Well, Wyoming uses cloud seeding as an environmentally friendly way to squeeze a little more snow from clouds, boosting annual snowpack. That feeds a little more water into its reservoirs to supply both cities and agriculture. But if this technique is truly effective, why isn't it being used to help fight wildfires? Cowboy State Daily's Renee Jean, a scientist herself, went searching for the answer to that question.
In order to seed a cloud, you have to have a cloud. Cloud seeding does not conjure clouds for you. The reason we get rain is sometimes these little bits of water vapor are happy to get closer and closer and clump together, and they get heavy enough to fall. But sometimes they could care less about each other and they just keep their distance, and the clouds then just kind of dissipate and go away and we get no rain. This is where the cloud seeding can kind of come in and help. So you can shoot some silver iodide in there. That gives something that's going to help attract and clump together these little water particles so they'll finally fall out of the sky. There are months of studies that go into where do these ground cannons need to be aimed, how much iodide do they need to shoot. You can't do that kind of study in the middle of fighting a fire.
Jean says the dry air compounded the conditions that made this fire season so destructive. Even if cloud seeding had been an option that firefighters were prepared to implement, there were no clouds to seed during the worst of the fires. Well, nearly 4 weeks ago, the Elk Fire exploded by nearly 20,000 acres across the eastern face of the Bighorn Mountains in northern Wyoming and right toward the small town of Dayton. Fast forward almost a month later, and not only aren't people's homes being threatened anymore by what's grown to be a nearly 97,000-acre late-season wildfire, firefighting crews are now using terms like full containment and damage assessment, according to Cowboy State Daily's Greg Johnson.
It went from Friday, they had 58% containment on it, and by Saturday, it was at 73%, which is where they're still reporting it Sunday. The owner of the Parkman Bar and Grill says that, finally people are starting to think about getting back to normal. It's a big relief for everybody up there. But again, the fire's not out, so they're not totally unaware of what's going on. However, they're no longer threatened that they have to leave their homes or anything like that.
Fire officials report that 2 people lost their homes and some lost their cabins. Additionally, much winter pasture lands are gone for ranchers, as well as some summer pastures on the mountain. And now let's take a look at today's weather with Cowboy State Daily meteorologist Don Day.
Well, we have winter weather advisories and winter storm watches in effect for portions of northern and western Wyoming and into the Black Hills as we head into the next 48 hours because a strong Pacific cold front is marching its way from the Pacific Northwest, and it's just now entering far northern and northwestern areas of Wyoming today. Now, tonight, tomorrow, and into early Wednesday, cold, moist weather will spread northwest to southeast across Wyoming, bringing snow to all of Wyoming's mountain ranges and some rain, then turning to snow and much colder temperatures on the plains. Now, amounts of snow are going to vary depending on where you are. It looks like the heaviest snowfall will be in the high country, so hunters be advised of that, especially tonight through Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. We will have some travel concerns on some roads, highways, and mountain passes as well.
You can get Don's full forecast on the Cowboy State Daily website. I'll be back in just 20 seconds with more news.
Comparing your home to a luxury resort is like comparing apples to oranges. So why are they being taxed the same? Amendment A allows our homes to be taxed at a lower, fairer rate than commercial properties. Vote yes on Amendment A.
Well, when longtime Denver TV reporter Daryl Orr lost his job unexpectedly in midlife, he wasn't worried until he couldn't get another job in his field because everyone kept telling him he was overqualified. So the Cheyenne man decided to do something completely different. Cowboy State Daily's Renee Jean reports that Orr took to the road, becoming a long-haul truck driver.
He just kept getting, you're overqualified, sorry, you're overqualified. Everywhere he went for like a year and a half. Finally, when he got kind of thinking outside the box, what can I do that's going to have this much salary so I can make ends meet? And that's when he noticed all these truck driving ads. Everybody's hiring truck drivers. There was a lot to learn, a lot of names. You have to do an inspection twice a day of your truck. So there's a lot to remember, but he's making more than he was before, probably more than he would ever get to in a media job. He hasn't given up storm chasing. He loved the meteorology gigs. He's turned that into kind of a hobby. He does little videos in his downtime.
Midlife job losses are tough, Orr said, and they can be harrowing experiences. But with persistence and an open mind, they can have a happy ending. Well, these days, some residents of Rock Springs don't know much about the town's legacy industry, even though the departure of coal mining gutted the community nearly 70 years ago. Until recently, unstable underground mines caused sinkholes that damaged city infrastructure. Cowboy State Daily's Riley Strand visited Rock Springs and spoke to a historian who took him on a tour of the town and its precarious position on top of a network of coal mining tunnels.
Sinkholes definitely did open up next to houses. There was the sinkhole that opened up right in front of City Hall. And there's not really much warning for a lot of this stuff. But as the historian told us, it wasn't like this big doom and gloom situation. The people in the town, they were used to living really hard lives. So they weren't really that bothered by it. It was just like, well, it's just something we got to fix. And that maybe is a testament to the personalities and attitudes of people that live in Rock Springs. They're very tough people from what I can tell.
Cleanup from the old mines is coming to an end with a project to shore up old coal tunnels under I-80. Well, during Prohibition, rum runner Joe Carey partnered with the First National Bank in Grable to make sure the residents there, including the local cops, the Elks Club, and the pharmacist, still got their liquor. He did so well, he was able to buy the bank building in April 1927 when it failed leading up to the Great Depression. Cowboy State Daily's Jackie Dorothy visited the building, which Carrie turned into a hotel, and she spoke to its current owner, Miles Foley, not about the rum running, but about the supposed ghosts that still haunt the halls.
I wouldn't say it was heavily haunted, but it was definitely something there. And down in the speakeasy, just like Miles Foley, the owner, was saying, is that it feels like a cheerful place. There's no oppression, nothing. It just feels like you're back in the 1920s with these people that are enjoying life, not necessarily doing anything really illegal.
Foley said that the spirits that still linger at the Grable Hotel aren't sinister. Laughter has been heard, and those voices from the past still greet patrons of today. The horror of mutilated cattle, cheeks cut off on one side, tongues missing, bloodless carcasses, and no visible signs of predation made big, bold headlines across Wyoming and the West in the mid-1970s. Cowboy State Daily's Dale Killingbeck took a look back at the mysterious, almost otherworldly happenings, and he said that for some folks, the horror of it still hasn't gone away.
For me, the story began when I was in the Air Force back in those days in Colorado, so I remember the headlines. But we just decided just to take a look back at that story to see what relevance it is today. And what surprised me was that there's still cattle mutilations going on. There were some in Oregon and Texas a couple of years ago, talking to the sheriff from the county in southwest Wyoming, where he was on the ground. He investigated those mutilations. He said they had evidence of rotor wash. They saw where helicopters had landed. So for him, this story is not about UFOs, but his suspicion was it was something to do with the U.S. government, U.S. military.
The Casper Star-Tribune reported on October 26, 1975, that suspected cattle mutilations surpassed 45 cows, with 10 in Sublette County alone and 16 in Uinta County. Well, if the 1884 walls at Bohemian Metals in Cheyenne could talk, oh, the tales they'd tell. The store's owner, Brian Snyder, has a few remnants of that history, but most of its story seemed destined to remain a mystery until one day, out of the blue, he got a message from a San Diego history buff. Cowboy State Daily's Renee Jean spoke to Mike Hennessy, who traced his grandfather's path back to the period of time between 1865 and 1910, when Abraham Underwood was a mover and shaker in the railroad town of Cheyenne.
Mike Hennessy had dug into some history on one of his ancestors, and the trail led straight to the Bohemian Metals building. And then next door, you've got the steel-looking, kind of modernish 1960s vintage shop that used to all be part of one building. And it was built by the Knights of Pythias, a fellow named Justice, and then this A. Underwood. Well, Brian's always known the name A. Underwood, but he didn't know anything about the guy. And so here comes Mike Hennessy with his shopping bag full of old documents from his family, and he's kind of filling in some of the blanks of Cheyenne's history.
Underwood history is still being revealed, and it's been fun for both Hennessy and Snyder to fill in some of the blanks about the building and illuminating the story of one of America's early settlers who helped build the West and Cheyenne. And Cody residents Greg and Tammy Poley are trying to find a new home for a cabin sitting on their property along the South Fork Highway near Cody. The ramshackle structure might be a relic from a community submerged over a century ago. But as Cowboy State Daily's Andrew Rossi reports, its history is a mystery.
This cabin possibly came from the community of Marquette, which is basically Wyoming's Atlantis. It was a community that was sitting behind the spot where the Buffalo Bill Dam would be built, and then it was eventually flooded by the Buffalo Bill Reservoir. Old Trail Town, it preserves a lot of historic structures from the early settlement of Cody and the neighboring region, so that seems like it would be the natural place for it. But I spoke with them. It's very easily could have been in Marquette, but they couldn't confirm it, like the brothel that they opened this summer. They can trace the history of the brothel, but this cabin's a little more elusive.
The Poleys say they were told the cabin was the post office for the town of Marquette, but a until they find out more about the structure's history, its origins will remain a mystery. And that's today's news. Get your free digital subscription to Wyoming's only statewide newspaper by hitting the daily newsletter button on cowboystatedaily.com. And you can watch this newscast every day by clicking subscribe on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to drop in on the Cowboy State Daily Morning Show with Jake Nichols, Monday through Friday from 6 to 10 a.m. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Wendy Core for Cowboy State Daily.
Wyoming is a big state. There are so many stories to tell, and here at Cowboy State Daily, we pride ourselves in bringing those stories to you every day. I'm Riley Strand, videographer and production assistant for Cowboy State Daily Video News. Every day, host Wendy Core and I talk to the experienced journalists who are covering the topics, issues, and people that are important to Wyomingites. And in our daily newscast, we bring you their stories. Tune in to Cowboy State Daily Video News every morning, only on cowboystatedaily.com.
Yeah, good morning. 6:16 on a Monday. This week's going to have some weather in it. We're going to talk to Don Day next hour and find out how much, what's going on. But yeah, you've been warned. It's Halloween week, so, it's right on time with Halloween. We'll talk to Cowboy State Daily Managing Editor Greg Johnson, and then we'll tee up the morning for you. Normally, we have the sunrise photo, so we can sort of incorporate Greg into that. Sunrise photo is a beauty taken over Half Moon Lake.
I love this feature. I love the sunrise photos. It's great. People get a lot of really awesome shots.
Have you ever been live and in person, Half Moon Lake outside of Pinedale? Beautiful place.
I have not.
It is gorgeous. I have camped right there. Let me unzoom you for just a second to show folks. Beautiful shot by Pat and Liz Queely. Sunrise over Half Moon Lake just outside of Pinedale. If you ever been in the area, there's tons of lakes, obviously. These are all the lakes of Pinedale. Fremont Lake is the lake most people know, but you've got Willow up there. Burnt Lake, Boulder Lake is great. Any of those lakes camping, so cool. Such a great area in the Wind Rivers. Yeah, what's happening, Greg? I see folks on the Elk Fire. 4 weeks ago, we were knocking on doors and telling people you got to grab what you can and you got to go. And now, different scenario, but learning to live after the fire, that might be a tough task. But getting back to normal up there?
Yeah, somewhat. There are some people, of course, they lost a lot of their rangeland and fences and stuff. But for the most part, yeah, it's they're the other day they used the actual term full containment. Yeah, they're working for that. They're at like 73% now. Although they report Sunday that it was more active. It was a little warmer, a little drier, so the fire did act up a little bit. But they maintain that containment.
Yeah, and I think other fire as well, Pack Trail, both those fire. This is going to be the final week of that stuff. We're to be talking about wildfires now as we approach Halloween. I don't remember trick-or-treating when wildfires were going on ever.
No,
it's
crazy. It's just so unusual to get this far into the season and not and still be fighting them as actively as we are.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, hopefully we put that in the rear view mirror by the end of this week. We're trick-or-treating. I'm going to use trick-or-treating and candy as a way to explain to kids what taxes are all about. Taxes are on my mind. Taxes are in a couple of stories for Cowboy State Daily today, and they're the subject that you go to any coffee klatch, and man, them old geezers is talking about taxes.
Yeah, yeah, and it doesn't have to be election season. I mean, that's what they are. I remember going in and visiting with the guys at Perkins and Gillette. Yeah, it was. It's mostly politics. Some about how the young generation is ruining the world. The typical the things that our parents complained about. Now the things that we complain
Right.
about. So it's but it's fun. You really want to get to the heart of what some people are talking about. That's it. Visit a coffee clatch.
For sure. Jen Coker did in that coffee clatch of the Old Farts. That's the name they give themselves. Old Farts Society. They talk taxes there. And Cole Case, Senator Case, is talking taxes. And maybe Fremont County should lose their own tax. That's this business tax. $14.7 million have helped the jumpstart the economy of Fremont County, but now there's some murmurings lately that the money is not particularly well spent, and they might want to get rid of tax on themselves, even if it does help the economy. How about this weatherman? Would talk to Don Day and see if he's any good at double clutching or driving a semi. This weatherman in the Denver area lost his job and turned into a trucker. No relation to Jimmy Orr, right? This is Daryl Orr.
Yeah, no relation.
Okay.
But, well, I thought Renee did a great job on that story because it really encapsulates some of the problems when you have to do that midlife career change, which a lot of people in Wyoming, the coal miners up in Gillette, when they had the big mass layoffs with Arch and Peabody, and then with Black Jewel again, and everything. And so a lot of people are like switching their careers, and he got a lot of feedback. Like, it's almost like saying, welcome to unemployment. Sorry, you're overqualified for everything.
Yeah. He would send out.
That's what he was running into.
Right. He would send out resumes everywhere. I mean, other than being a weatherman, he had some good experience in a lot of fields, like far and above anything anybody was looking for. They're like, thanks, no thanks, you're overqualified. So he could do a complete pivot, a complete switch, even though his wife said, you ain't driving no truck. He said that pays the bills. And find out how Daryl Orr made the midlife switch to truck driver, although he still can't quite shake the old meteorology thing because his truck is tricked out like not many other truck drivers. And he always knows what weather is coming. What else is going on, Greg?
You know what? I loved Jackie's story over the weekend about White Devil, the spectral ghost horse that protects the wild Mustangs.
Ooh.
He still may be out there.
Yeah.
He'll come up and bite you. He's an ornery guy looking out for those Mustangs.
Really cool story, Jackie. Jackie had a bunch, and it's Halloween. I mean, we're getting down the last week of October, so of course you're hearing about a lot of haunted, spooky stuff. I knew Wyoming had its share of haunted places, but I didn't know we had this many. All kinds of weird haunted places. We're going to visit the Sweetwater County Library and find out why that place is a little bit spooked as well. What else?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what they talk about, right? Location.
Right. If you build a library over a grave site, over a cemetery, probably going to get some rattling of cages and some moans at night.
Yeah.
Very
On
strange.
Dale's story about all the cattle mutilations.
Yeah.
They're still mysterious. Just about everywhere I've been, there's been stories of cattle mutilations. And the theories. The theory is either the government's doing it or aliens. But it's some of what's done to this cattle is strange and mysterious. It is interesting and a little spooky.
Definitely. We can't ignore our own columnist, Cassie Craven, with another hard-hitting, oh, man, I've got to get Cassie on this week if it's the last thing I do. She's so funny, so pulls no punches. She lays it. Cassie Craven with a great article over the weekend, great column. Dennis Sun speculates the wild horses are a problem, not only for cattlemen, but for sage grouse, as a University of Wyoming study shows. And bison can be a problem for the cattlemen as well. We kicked a whole bunch of buffalo out of Yellowstone, and that continues to be a controversy, Greg.
Yeah. I thought Andrew did a good job on that story. There's a pretty thorough report explaining why they want to keep the herd between 3,500 and 6,000 bison. But a lot of people say, the greater ecosystem there can support twice as many or even a little more. So why don't they do it? Well,
yeah.
It's a debate. Everything is a debate, Jake. Nobody comes up with something and everybody says, yeah, we all agree with that.
We can't agree on anything, not even football. Your Denver Broncos look pretty good.
They did. Unfortunately, UW just 1-7. It's one of those times where you find out who the true fans are.
Yeah, for sure. I watched that last-minute field goal, Utah State. You didn't even have to watch it. I just turned away. I'm like, I know he's going to get it because it's that kind of season, and we're going to lose on a last-minute field goal, a walk-off field goal.
The battle of the 1-6 teams going at it. It's just rough. It's just rough. And then the coach, getting called out by the Mountain West Conference for his comments, which I don't disagree with. I don't think you could say I'm here, but I don't disagree with it.
We're going to talk to Sally Ann Shermer, the biggest Cowboy fan there is, coming up and say, hey, hang in there, guys. There's life after college for some of us. Logan Wilson plays football now, gets paid a lot of money to play football for the Cincinnati Bengals. Great linebacker, and he'll always be a Casper boy at heart. That's what he told our own Renee Jean.
Yeah, and if you are you talking to Riley today?
Yeah,
the Rock Springs package you put
great
together.
Story.
The video is really, really good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Great story. In fact, we speculate. I teased it. Why is Rock Springs on the verge of collapse? And your average Rock Springs resident probably doesn't know it. But yeah, he's got the whole scoop. Great video. Fantastic. Yeah, this and a whole bunch more on a busy, busy Monday. Greg, thanks.
Yeah, apparently there isn't a lot of good land to build on in Sweetwater County when you talk about libraries and Rock Springs. It's difficult to find just a stable piece of land.
Man, you've either got, an age-old frontier cemetery under you, or you got coal mines, which apparently that's a lot of soft earth, and it tends to settle. And, be careful building in Rock Springs. Definitely.
Awesome. We'll let you get back to all the important stuff.
No. You're the important part of the day. Thanks, Greg. That's Greg Johnson, managing editor of the Cowboy State Daily, helping us out this morning. Every morning he tees it up for us and gives you an idea of what we're going to be looking at for today. And we already hit our sunset photo of the day. Big thank you to Pat and Liz Quealy. Let me give you a quick view of that again. Half Moon Lake. I love this place. I've camped there with the dogs many a time. Took a canoe trip over the lake. Beautiful sunrise over Half Moon Lake. The calm before the storm. Say the Queelies must have stormed right after that, huh? Don Day's weather forecast. Let's take a look at that. Don Day has a pretty nice photo. Look at that photo. Man, that's Brett Allard. The gorgeous sunrise over Sunlight Basin. Appropriately named, huh? That's not bad at all. Weather forecast today, changes coming, and we're seeing snow. We'll see snow at some of the upper elevations. Accumulation, you bet. How about central Wyoming, Casper, Riverton, Shoshone? It'll start clouding up this morning. That'll bring rain in the afternoon. Probably late afternoon after 5 or so. Otherwise, you'll be sunny and breezy to start, but watch the clouds build. High today around 66, and then it all goes changing by tomorrow. Southwest Wyoming, you're going to see it first. Evanston, Green River, Lyman, winter weather advisory starting at midnight tonight. Slight chance of rain after 3 today. Otherwise, you're sunny, 57, breezy. Today's kind of a day where in the beginning of the day, you're getting a little bit of tease. It looks going to look pretty nice with highs in the 60s and mostly sunny, but it's coming. Western Wyoming, Pinedale, Alpine, Big Piney, slight chance of rain in the afternoon. Otherwise, you'll start the day partly sunny. A few high clouds and then more clouds. Highs today right around 50, low 50s for Pinedale. Alpine, you might not get to 50. Northwest Wyoming, DuBois, Jackson, up there in the Yellowstone National Park. Chance of rain this afternoon, sometime right around 1 or 2 in the afternoon after a partly sunny start to the day. Jackson, some of that rain could be mixed with snow, as the high today only about 47 at Jackson, mid-50s for DuBois, and probably not even 40 in Yellowstone National Park at Old Faithful. Bighorn Basin, Thermopolis, Cody, Sleep. You're looking at a chance of rain mainly in the afternoon, late afternoon around 5, otherwise breezy. Sunny start, clouds coming. With highs low 60s, upper 50s. North central Wyoming, Buffalo, Sheridan, Ranchester. You'll see a sunny start to the day, breezy, and then some rain beginning around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, with highs around 60 at best, upper 50s or so. Northeast Wyoming, Gillette, Newcastle, Hewlett, mostly sunny start to the day, and then clouds rolling in probably early evening. Highs in the 60s. Well, you should be mainly precipitation free for the day and night. And there, your rain won't start till tomorrow. Eastern Plains, partly sunny, with highs in the low to mid 70s, but breezy. And your chance of rain again comes tomorrow. Cheyenne, Laramie, Pine Bluffs, partly sunny start to the day. Highs in the low 70s, upper 60s, with some breezy conditions. South central Wyoming, Rawlins, Encampment, Wamsutter. Sunny, windy, highs in the low 60s. Wamsutter, you might see shower activity beginning at 2 in the afternoon. Let's take a look at the current conditions and your weather map. Find out what's going on. You can see a really defined band of weather, kind of 2 of them. I'm sure Don Day would love to draw all kinds of stuff on this with his magic marker, but a very defined band of things moving through Shoshone, Riverton, Ethity. You're feeling it right now. That rain, that cloud covered just south of Buffalo, just south of Thermopolis and Pinedale. 25 degrees in Jackson, you're 30 degrees in Grable. Buffalo, you're 44 currently. Casper, 60. That's a hot spot in the state. Down to Cheyenne, about 54, 46 in Laramie. Wheatland, you're 53. And again, you can see that rain coming through. And I'll look down all the way in the southwest corner, Evanston, 40 right now. But Evanston's going to be on the front lines of what's moving through. Rain turning snow, and you'll see it first down there in Uintah County. Nothing impacting your travel at this point. You got that wind advisory on I-80 over Elk Mountain, and that's kind of a regular course of business. But otherwise, so far, YL Roads, YDOT reporting no impact to travel weather-wise this morning. We'll dig into our first story and set you up with our guest today. And I think a little bit of a thin Monday as far as our guest joining us. Oh, I want to hit those high school football scores as well every Monday. Sally Ann Shermer will be here at 8:30. We'll talk about University of Wyoming sports, particularly that tough loss Saturday to Utah State. Leo's going to be with us this morning around 8:15. And, I think maybe we'll try to get Mark Hines in here, but he's been away hunting. I don't know if I want to roust him after a week-long hunt, and I heard from Mark that it was unsuccessful, so maybe he'll be in a bad mood. We might have to stay away from Mark Hines today. But Sally Ann Shermer, that'll be fun. I mean, even though the topic will be another Wyoming Cowboy loss, we'll be back and wrap up the high school football season. Final game of the regular season happened last Friday. We'll tell you who did what and who's doing what as we head into the playoffs next week. We'll do that right after this quick break. Nah, I don't. That's not the music I wanted. I'm going to change up my music like once a month. So when we get to November, I'm going to switch up all my music. But that one doesn't feel high school sports to me at all. Maybe. Yeah, all right. Close enough. High school football across the region. Here's what it looked like last Friday in the 4A. Sheridan continues that record-setting winning streak. The Bronx better than Laramie, 48-0, no problem. Number 2 ranked Campbell County got the best of third-ranked Cheyenne East in a thriller, 29-26. Natrona County 34, Cheyenne Central 8. Thunder Basin whooped up on Cheyenne South 62-7. Kelly Walsh 22, Rock Springs 15. In the 3A, in the Battle of the Bronx, Cody Jackson in a game I called here in Jackson. I'm not sure the final score, 41-14 Cody over Jackson, but it was anything but the cakewalk I think Cody was predicting. That game was kind of fun for a little while. Star Valley, with a little postseason tune-up, took care of Green River 61-7. Riverton 37, Rollins 13. Watch out for third-ranked Riverton. They are playing better and better all season long. Douglas 28, Torrington 21 in a fun game. Powell in a hugely important game for playoff seeding. went on the road and beat Evanston 14-6, and Lander 42, Buffalo 35, and a bit of a surprise game there. And looking at the 2A, number 2, Mountain View 20, Lyman 6, Warland 35, Kemmer 6, top-ranked Bighorn 47 over Upton Sundance 47-8, third-ranked Lovell 47, number 4, Cokeville 20, Tongue River beat Glenrock 22-19, Burns better than Moorcroft 47-13, 33-7 Thermopolis over Pinedale, and Newcastle cruised to victory against Wheatland 40-13. That's your high school football sports scene, University of Wyoming. Yeah, let's not talk about it till Sally Ann comes on. It's a little bit depressing. Our top story for today, Monday, Cowboy State Daily, as you saw in the newsletter, is the cloud seeding thing. Could cloud seeding work to put out a fire? First, let's check out the Elk Fire and the latest story from Greg Johnson. We just talked to Greg. Progress looking really good on the Elk Fire. 73% contained. After this week, Elk Fire should be pretty much 100%, and if not out. I mean, this will be a good week to finally shut this thing down in the Wyoming Bighorns. Locals now starting to move into some level of normalcy, or they're trying to get there after 4 weeks. Remember, it was just 4 weeks. Does that seem like a long time ago or a short time ago when that Elk Fire just blew up by 20,000 acres in one night? Remember that? In some ways, it seems like a long time ago. It seems like, oh, that was way back in the summer. In other ways, it doesn't seem that long ago. For the folks living it, I'm sure it's felt all of 4 weeks. It's been 4 weeks where they've had to drastically alter their lifestyle in the towns of Parkman and Dayton and those other little towns nearby, both of them threatened by the wildfire. That 97,000 acre late season fire is now winding down. They're getting the upper hand on it. Amanda Fry, spokesperson for the Rocky Mountain Complex Incident Management Team 1, that's a mouthful, said they're making good progress every day as far as fire. And, Amanda Fry has seen her share of fires, I'm sure. But she said, I never thought I'd see anything like that in my lifetime. Just to see people's livelihoods go up in smoke and flames, it's scary. Yeah, that's a for real fire. But in the aftermath, think about all those hay fields burned up. And that's where that story last week is interesting about the Texas ranchers who pledged to help out their Wyoming friends, trucking hay and other supplies up here. They understand what's going to be coming up next, even when the fire's out this coming winter and even next winter. There's going to be a real need for cattle feed, for hay in particular, this winter. So many hay fields burned up in that fire. And the Texas Navy, or whatever they call themselves, they're ready to truck up some more hay. Whatever you need, they said, just let us know. Call us. You guys helped us out in the Panhandle fire. We're ready for you. Whatever you need, we'll send a truck of hay anytime. This is pretty cool. Thank you, Texas. But life getting back to normal. Let me share these photos with you just so I can drink coffee. This story from Greg Johnson. You can see here, some beautiful fall colors in the foreground, but in the background, Oh, you see some stuff that was burnt. This is from Highway 14 that shows large swaths of land burned by the Elk Fire, and a home right there in the middle that was spared. And many of those homes that were spared, like this one right in the middle of the action, were spared because of the work of hillbilly hotshots, local volunteers, and landowners and homeowners, and of course the hardworking firefighters there to do a job. Fantastic. Crews continue to do the mop-up stuff. That's pretty cool. Every time you go to a community, you see these kids at school fill out these thank you firefighter cards. Fighting fire with fire, a bunch of fuel containers there. Yeah, good story. Greg Johnson, who wants to pass on the word that while the fire is almost contained fully, it's not over yet, but this week should get us close.
Well, nearly 4 weeks ago, the Elk Fire exploded by nearly 20,000 acres across the eastern face of the Bighorn Mountains in northern Wyoming and right toward the small town of Dayton. Fast forward almost a month later, and not only aren't people's homes being threatened anymore by what's grown to be a nearly 97,000-acre late-season wildfire, firefighting crews are now using terms like full containment and damage assessment, according to Cowboy State Daily's Greg Johnson.
It went from Friday, they had 58% containment on it, and by Saturday it was at 73%, which is where they're still reporting it Sunday. The owner of the Parkman Bar and Grill says that finally people are starting to think about getting back to normal. It's a big relief for everybody up there, but again, the fire's not out, so they're not totally unaware of what's going on. However, they're no longer threatened that they have to leave their homes or anything like that.
Fire officials report that 2 people lost their homes and some lost their cabins. Additionally, much winter pasture lands are gone for ranchers, as well as some summer pastures on the mountain.
Yeah, great story. Greg Johnson just continuing to follow up with the fires. We were there in the beginning, and we want to finish them out. When these things are finally stomped out, I think Cowboy State Daily wants to put the last boot heel into the last burning ember and say, this thing's done, just to have it behind us. Some questions, though, in the aftermath of the wildfires. One of them answered by our own Renee Jean, who's a scientist in her own right, but she went to another scientist, Don Day, the meteorologist for Wyoming and the Cowboy State Daily, and she speculated, why couldn't Wyoming wildfires be put out by cloud seeding? We hear a lot about cloud seeding, not the government control of weather, but legitimate programs. There's an ongoing decades-old cloud seeding program going on in the Cowboy State, if you didn't know, to varied success, depends on who you ask. Has it been fruitful? Can you really cloud seed? Can you really cause it to rain? Well, Renee had that great quote. She said, in order to seed a cloud, you have to have a cloud. And for the most part, in that Bighorn Basin and the Bighorn Mountains and in the area around the Elk Fire, the reason it became a tinderbox, and then once it got burning, the reason it couldn't be put out very easily is there was no clouds to be found for remember the month of September. I mean, July and August, hot and dry, but September was ridiculous, record-setting hot and dry. No clouds anywhere. And in order to do cloud seeding, you got to start with something. Don Day in the story said, if you have clear skies and high pressure, you can't just go up and throw up some silver iodide and expect it to work. That's not how cloud seeding works. So good explanation, good story from Renee Jean. These are stories where journalists try to anticipate what people are wondering, you know, kind of similar to last week when we heard about the death of the famed grizzly bear 399. The speculation was what will become of her cub, and so you saw follow-up stories on that. What will become of Grizz 399, and could she be cremated? Is there even a crematory that's big enough, equipped to cremate a grizzly bear? Yes, there is. All those follow-up stories from journalists who are always asking questions. What do people want to know? What do people want to know in this case with the wildfires? Well, what about that cloud seeding thing? Couldn't we have put this fire out with some rainstorms that we create? Not really. Renee Jean said, nice idea, but you got to start with something in order to get some kind of, cloud seeding going.
Well, Wyoming uses cloud seeding as an environmentally friendly way to squeeze a little more snow from clouds, boosting annual snowpack. That feeds a little more water into its reservoirs to supply both cities and agriculture. But if this technique is truly effective, why isn't it being used to help fight wildfires? Cowboy State Daily's Renee Jean, a scientist herself, went searching for the answer to that question.
In order to seed a cloud, you have to have a cloud. Cloud seeding does not conjure clouds for you. The reason we get rain is sometimes these little bits of water vapor are happy to get closer and closer and clump together, and they get heavy enough to fall. But sometimes they could care less about each other and they just keep their distance, and the clouds then just kind of dissipate and go away and we get no rain. This is where the cloud seeding can kind of come in and help. So you can shoot some silver iodide in there. That gives something that's going to help attract and clump together these little water particles so they'll finally fall out of the sky. There are months of studies that go into where do these ground cannons need to be aimed, how much iodide do they need to shoot. You can't do that kind of study in the middle of fighting a fire.
Jean says the dry air compounded the conditions that made this fire season so destructive. Even if cloud seeding had been an option that firefighters were prepared to implement, there were no clouds to seed during the worst of the fires.
Well, there you have it from our own Renee Jean. You don't get nothing from nothing. Isn't that a song? Yeah. No, nothing from nothing. It's not Bill. It's Billy Preston, right? I ought to know this. A DJ should know this. Yeah, you can't get nothing from nothing.
If you want to be with me, you gotta have something. If you want to be with me,
Yeah.
'Cause that minus is too low to see.
Nothing from nothing. You can't get nothing from nothing is basically what your meteorologist will tell you. We'll ask Don Day when he joins us next hour at 7:20. Can you get nothing from nothing? Don will give us a puzzled look, no doubt. He'll be like, what? Hopefully he's listening in early and he'll know what we're talking about. But you can't create nothing from nothing. You got to have some clouds. And from what I understand, that program does have some success being able to seed clouds. But mostly it's winter related. You're trying to make it snow more over the mountains where clouds tend to gravitate anyway, and you tend to get snow over mountains. So just making it snow more so you have that snowpack for spring, that's where the program has shown a little bit of success, I believe. But to do cloud seeding in August or September when there isn't any clouds, yeah, it's probably not going to work too good. This Cheyenne man's midlife career change. He went from TV reporter to truck driver. And it's it's a pretty neat story. I thought he was, he's a meteorologist, a TV meteorologist. So that sounds like another Don Day story. And his Denver TV station told him one day, that's all he got is your position is being eliminated. You're fired. His Daryl Orr, his first reaction was shock and panic. There was no warning. He told Cowboy State Daily, my contract says I'm supposed to get 30 days notice, but there was nothing. Orr did, on advice of his own employer, start collecting unemployment. But, that lasts only so long. And as he searched for a job, he said he went from shock and panic to, okay, I got this. I'm qualified to do a lot of different things in life. And so out went the resumes. And, after a month or 2 months, he started getting a little bit worried. He said he would follow up the resume and he would not hear a word. So he would follow up and say, hey, did you get my resume? And he heard every time he called somebody at the HR department, they'd say, you're overqualified. I mean, just no. So with his meteorology degree and other background, he started looking into anything and everything and just couldn't find a job that would pay the bills. He looked at airlines. He had some training in flight school, but salaries weren't going to cover his expenses. He can run satellite equipment, do broadcast engineering, so he applied for a job at Spectrum in Cheyenne multiple times, he said, and every time the answer was the same, overqualified. Everywhere I went, I was overqualified. So what do you do? Midlife crisis, complete change of gears, excuse the pun, but he saw an ad in the paper for truck drivers, over-the-road drivers. And he thought, well, he didn't have any experience in it, but he liked the idea that it would pay the bills. In fact, when he saw the salary numbers for the week, he said, yeah, that could work. What do you think, wifey? And the wifey said, nope, you're not driving no truck. You're going to be away from home for 345 days out of the year. You might miss Christmas and Thanksgiving with a family. No way. You're not driving truck. The quote from Orr was, hell no, you're not doing that, his wife said. He said, well, somebody's got to pay the bills around here. And she finally gave in once he showed her that he could make anywhere from $2,500 to $3,000 a week. Problem was he didn't know anything about truck driving. He'd have to get a CDL. He'd have to start from scratch. And what a lot of these trucking companies do is they put you in a little driving school crash course in order to get your CDL, but they make you pay for it. Now, they'll front you the money, but you got to pay it back in your salary. This trucking school costs about $6,500. So he did it. He went through, and I had no idea it was so extensive. I mean, your average trucker has got to know a lot of things, man. Daryl Orr said he had to learn the parts to all the trucks in case, you have a breakdown. You have to do inspections on these parts, pre-inspections before you hit the road. And he had to learn all the parts of the truck. So he finally does pass. He gets his CDL, and he's on the job. He was able to spend Christmas and Thanksgiving at home. Although he said both times he was home, it was like minus 50 wind chill. He goes, why couldn't I have been in Florida or something? But at least he was with the family. He said it's been a big learning curve, and he can't quite put away the whole meteorology thing in his truck cab. He's all kind of tricked out. He said, my truck is set up like a TV station. I've got laptops, cameras, radios, ham radios, police scanners. I get in the truck and my fellow truckers are like, don't you know you don't work for the news anymore? Why do you have a rolling studio in here? I guess he just can't shake the old job, the old ways. But a former TV reporter, meteorologist, driving truck, and he said it's falling right into it. Loves it. Midlife career change after losing his TV job, and he loves being a truck driver, an over-the-road truck driver. Way to go, Daryl. Our own Renee Jean has that story. Super interesting. Check it out, thecowboystatedaily.com. Let's get you to top of the hour news. And this is Wendy Core. We'll be right back after news.
It's time to take a look at what's happening around Wyoming for Monday, October 28th. From the Cowboy State Daily Newsroom, I'm Wendy Core. There are too many bison in Yellowstone National Park. That's what Yellowstone's bison program manager reports, and plans are to remove more than 1,300 of them over the winter in order to keep the herd within population ranges established by the Interagency Bison Management Plan. But wildlife advocates believe the long-term ecology of Yellowstone's bison management is being jeopardized by short-term decisions to cull the herds. That's according to Cowboy State Daily's Andrew Rossi.
The concerns are that, as the expert that I spoke to put it, we're gradually domesticating bison because we're keeping them confined to this space where their gene pool is being diluted because don't have the ability to expand into their historic range. So we're losing a part of the bison's wild nature because of this management plan.
Through the work of the National Park Service, tribal partners, and conservation groups like the Montana Wild Bison Coalition, there are possible solutions to address the issue. Nearly 4 weeks ago, the elk fire exploded by nearly 20,000 acres across the eastern face of the Bighorn Mountains in northern Wyoming and right toward the small town of Dayton. Fast forward almost a month later, and not only aren't people's homes being threatened anymore by what's grown to be a nearly 97,000-acre late-season wildfire, firefighting crews are now using terms like full containment and damage assessment, according to Cowboy State Daily's Greg Johnson.
It went from Friday, they had 58% containment on it, and by Saturday, it was at 73%, which is where they're still reporting it Sunday. The owner of the Parkman Bar and Grill says that, finally people are starting to think about getting back to normal.
Fire officials report that 2 people lost their homes and some lost their cabins. Additionally, many pasture lands are gone for ranchers. Wyoming uses cloud seeding as an environmentally friendly way to squeeze a little more snow from clouds, boosting annual snowpack. But if this technique is truly effective, why isn't it being used to help fight wildfires? Cowboy State Daily's Renee Jean, a scientist herself, went searching for the answer to that question.
In order to seed a cloud, you have to have a cloud. Cloud seeding does not conjure clouds for you. So you can shoot some silver iodide in there. That gives something that's going to help attract and clump together these little water particles so they'll finally fall out of the sky. There are months of studies that go into how much iodide do they need to shoot. You can't do that kind of study in the middle of fighting a fire.
Jean says the dry air compounded the conditions that made this fire season so destructive. I'll be back with more news right after this.
Are you fabulous and 55? Are you ready to use your valuable time and talent to give back? Join Serve Wyoming through the AmeriCorps Seniors Retired and Senior Volunteer Program, or RSVP, and make a positive impact on your community. With a lifetime of skills and experiences, you're exactly what your community needs. Whether you're itching to lend a hand or your organization could use some extra support, we've got you covered. Call Sarah Roberts at Serve Wyoming at 307-234-3428 or RSVP at servewyoming.org.
Until recently, unstable underground abandoned coal mines within the city limits of Rock Springs caused sinkholes that damaged infrastructure. Cowboy State Daily's Riley Strand visited Rock Springs and spoke to a historian who took them on a tour of the town and its precarious position on top of a network of coal mining tunnels.
Sinkholes definitely did open up next to houses. There was the sinkhole that opened up right in front of City Hall. The people in the town, they were used to living really hard lives. So they weren't really that bothered by it. It was just like, well, it's just something we got to fix.
Cleanup from the old mines is coming to an end with a project to shore up old coal tunnels under I-80. And when longtime Denver TV reporter Daryl Orr lost his job unexpectedly in midlife, he wasn't worried until he couldn't get another job in his field because everyone kept telling him he was overqualified. So the Cheyenne man decided to do something completely different. Cowboy State Daily's Renee Jean reports that Orr took to the road, becoming a long-haul truck driver.
He's making more than he was before, probably more than he would ever get to in a media job. He hasn't given up storm storm chasing. He loved the meteorology gigs. He's turned that into kind of a hobby. He does little videos in his downtime.
Midlife job losses are tough, Orr said, but with persistence and an open mind, they can have a happy ending. And that's today's news. Get your free digital subscription to Wyoming's only statewide newspaper by hitting the daily newsletter button on cowboystatedaily.com. I'm Wendy Corr for Cowboy State Daily.
Cowboy State Daily Morning Show with Jake 705. That looks fantastic, Kimmy K. Yeah, I like it. What is that? The only... No, I don't want that one either. Yeah, I need to change all my music. I'm just dissatisfied with all of it. Luxury resorts, big box stores, and single-family homes. Can you guess who pays a higher tax rate? Here's a hint. They're all exactly the same. Not exactly fair, is it? Amendment A proposes to change that this November. Wyoming will vote to allow residential homes to be taxed at a lower, fairer rate. It's time we even the playing field, give our families a much-needed break. PAC for Wyoming is asking you to vote yes on Amendment A this November. I wonder how many people have already voted. I think a record number. We're going to talk to Leo Wolfson next hour and recap his story where he says early voting has been, quote, hot and heavy. Wyoming's smashing primary turnout so far. Primary turnout in Wyoming was meh. Kind of underwhelming, but it looks like the general in a presidential year, Wyoming usually turns out pretty robustly, and so far early voting has looked very good. Hot and heavy, as Leo Wolfson says in a story he dropped over the weekend. Some lines to vote early. I mean, if you vote early... How do you vote early? Can you just do it on your computer? No. You got to go.
Yeah, you got to go show your license and stuff.
Oh, right.
I think you have to.
I'm thinking, yeah, because I'm sorry, but I don't vote, so I don't know. But yeah, you still have to go in somewhere. And supposedly these lines are up to 30-minute wait in some lines, but people are still taking the time to get out there and vote early. Yeah, so
voting day will be less of a line.
That means on November 5th, yeah, you won't have the big crunch. I don't know. It's still going to be like taxes. Some people are going to do their taxes on January 1st. You know who you are, you accountants. Like Les Nessman, the dude with the pocket protector and the Coke bottle glasses. He's that first thing on January 1st. The rest of us are still got the hangover. We can't even wake up. Les Nessman's there doing his taxes. New year, new taxes. Time to close out 2024. So there's always going to be like early voting, Les Nessman's. There's always going to be, people straggle in and do it when they can. Whenever TurboTax, whenever you get tired of them bugging you with emails. Or there'll be people like me who wait till the very last day. I'm not doing my taxes till April 14th or whenever they're due. What is it? Sometimes I might do it a day late. Like if they give you an extension, if it falls over the weekend. Yeah, I do mine at the last minute. So I'd be a November 5th voter this year for sure. But Leo... he'll wrap with us next hour and talk about the turnout so far. Wyoming is getting after it early, which is kind of a game changer if you're looking to influence the vote, affect the vote, otherwise known as campaigning. I mean, how much campaigning do you do this late in the game with just a week or 2 or 3 left in the campaign season as the election day draws near? Election day doesn't have quite the impact it used to We don't all go out and vote on that Tuesday in November. Many of us have already voted. So is your message wasted if you wait till that last week or two? Interesting to speculate on that. Andrew Rossi has a story about bison getting kicked out of Yellowstone. This has been going on for a long time. And it'll be going on for a longer time. At the crux of the issue, of course, is brucellosis. Although you may be surprised to learn there are documented cases ever of brucellosis being transferred from a wild bison to a domesticated cow. Most of the brucellosis cases come from infected elk. That's a fact. In fact, I was surprised to see the numbers of the elk population that is considered affected by or carrying brucellosis. It was an alarmingly high number. 2013 study by the CDC showed brucellosis was discovered in 13 beef cattle herds and 4 ranched bison herds in the greater Yellowstone area back in the 2002 to 2012, that 10-year period. However, the study found the animal primarily responsible for the spread of brucellosis has been and still is free roaming throughout the ecosystem. It's unvaccinated cattle themselves and elk. Brucellosis is present in brucellosis is present in free-ranging elk. National Park Service estimates that 60% test positive for the bacteria. Only 10 to 15% of the population would be considered infected. Anyway, Yellowstone in their bison removal program, this has less to do with brucellosis. That's usually the argument used, or why can't you just let the bison roam their way out of the park or haze them out of the park? And it's mostly the beef industry that says, no, we don't want that. We don't want them on the forest land. So what happens is these bison are removed, and what removal means is one of 3 things. Collected bison will be available for state and tribal harvest outside the parks, or in other words, you'll have the historic Native American tribal hunts of the bison, or they'll be placed in bison conservation transfer program, perhaps sent to another state that wants bison, but more and more this becomes less effective as bison are kind of getting out there. Or they'll be donated to the tribal food transfer program. So at any rate, of the 3 methods to remove bison from Yellowstone, it sounds like the majority of them end up, with the bison, the end of the bison. And how they do it is they try to be even-handed and reflect existing demographic conditions. 30% calves and yearlings are culled out, 70% adults. They try to keep things even with the sex ratio, 50% male to female. Andrew Rossi has been covering this story about the bison removed from Yellowstone National Park, and the numbers were thousands, I think 1,700 something. Here's Andrew Rossi with more on that story in the Cowboy State Daily. That's out today.
There are too many bison in Yellowstone National Park. That's what Yellowstone's bison program manager reports. Over 6,000 of them, actually, and plans are to remove more than 1,300 over the winter in order to keep the herd within population ranges established by the Interagency Bison Management Plan. But wildlife advocates believe the long-term ecology of Yellowstone's bison management is jeopardized by short-term decisions to cull the herds, which are perceived as political rather than scientific. That's according to Cowboy State Daily's Andrew Rossi.
The concerns are that, as the expert that I spoke to put it, we're gradually domesticating bison because we're keeping them confined to this space where their gene pool is being diluted because don't have the ability to expand into their historic range. So we're losing a part of the bison's wild nature because of this management plan. And that's not the fault of the National Park Service for implementing it. It's because of the conflicts outside the park that the bison would inevitably run into.
Through the work of the National Park Service, tribal partners, and conservation groups like the Montana Wild Bison Coalition, there are possible solutions to address this urgent issue. The stakes are high as the consequence is losing wild bison forever.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, this all came about with the published report by Yellowstone's bison program manager, Chris Jeremiah. The target number for bison in Yellowstone is about 3,500 to 6,000 bison tops. They'd rather keep it under 6. And in the report, Jeremiah says there were nearly 6,000 bison in Yellowstone going back to last August. So to remove 1,375 helps them to stay under that 6,000. And of course, critics say by culling these bison and keeping them park bound, basically, not letting them drift out, you're messing around with the gene pool. I get that argument. Don Day's going to be popping in here in just a little bit and talk weather for this Monday. We've got a week's worth of weather coming up, and we're going to pack it all into a week. Something like that. But definitely weather change, and you kids trick-or-treating by Thursday. When is Halloween? Thursday, right? Yeah, there's some weather on the way, and you'll start to see different parts of the state will experience that later today, the afternoon, certainly by the overnight. And tomorrow it'll be statewide, just colder, rainy, snow at upper elevations. How much? How long? Don Day will have all the facts for you when we talk to him. We'll also ask him if he has any trucking experience should this whole weather thing not work out. Perhaps he's got a truck driving career like Daryl Orr. Great story from Renee about the Denver television reporter, TV meteorologist Daryl Orr, who lost his job one day and just did a 180. Decided to get in the cab of a 18-wheeler. I gotta get a trucking story ready for Don Day. That's what I'll do. What's a good? Let's see. Oh, there's so many good trucker songs. Yeah, we'll try this one. There's Don Day firing up the big rig. Yeah, that'll be Don Day's song when we put him on. Rolla, he's not going to know any of this. We're just going to ambush him with the whole truck driving thing. We're going to get Haunted Wyoming later, Sweetwater County Library. You're checking out your books there, and you might hear things creaking behind the bookshelf. Some moans, some laughing, some crying from the bathrooms. Lights flicker on and off, books thrown to the floor. Just all kinds of freakiness going on in the Sweetwater County Library. Yeah, we'll tell you why that's the case, and we'll talk to Jackie Dorothy later. Try to figure out just how haunted the Sweetwater County Library is. Our own Don Day is in the Zoom room. Don, here's a little song for you, and you'll have to guess why we're playing this old trucker song.
Big mama.
Hee-haw!
Roll on.
So what do you think, Don, if this whole meteorology thing doesn't work out for you? And so far, I mean, you're on a run, but you never know. Truck driving could be in your future, perhaps. We were... Oh, sorry. Oh, what's that?
There's something about the open road. You know?
Yeah. I mean, you want to experience weather, get out there in your big rig in your 18-wheeler, and weather is just on the other side of that big windshield, as Del Reeves might say.
Yeah, certainly it is. Certainly folks who are going to be driving the big rigs across the state next couple of days, they're going to go, yeah, this is why I hate driving across Wyoming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, trek across I-80, I feel for the truckers, man. That thing gets miserable in the winter. We just coming off a winter where that thing seemed like it was closed more than it was open. But it's coming. You said this week would be big weather change, and today is sort of the transition day. Some of these communities around the state are going to start off nice, sunny to partly sunny and maybe in the 60s, depending on where you are. But watch the breeze. That's going to blow in something by afternoon. Some places will see rain and maybe even snow tonight. What's going on, Don?
Yeah, we have a lot of winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings in effect for Wyoming's mountains. Just about all the major mountain ranges, including the Black Hills. And we have winter weather advisories for some of the low elevations like Evanston. What we're going to see, Jake, is that this system is a little bit of a different animal than a lot of our storms that we'll see during the cold season. It's a combination of things all working together. And what we're going to see is an axis of deeper moisture that's going to run from about Evanston through Green River, Rock Springs, South Pass, up through Lander, Riverton, Casper. Then it's going to go up to Gillette and over to Rapid City. Those cities I just named are going to be the center of the heavier moisture. That about 50 to 75 miles on either side of that line, the moisture will be pretty significant as well. However, there's going to be a real sharp drop off. So the northwest corner of the state and the southeast corners of the state won't see as much with this system as those areas underneath that line I just drew, that southwest to northeast trend line. But this is colder than the last storm, so a lot of folks are going to have their first significant snow of the season. And all of those mountain ranges along that path are going to get significant snow.
And on your weather map, when you do all the drawings with a magic marker, you showed a line, and the weather is behaving according to that line. This is it looks like a very well-defined system. Yeah,
when things line up, you literally do have these very sometimes sharp edges that will develop with the precipitation. So, it's Wyoming is a big state, and you never get these storms that treat everybody equally. You always have winners and losers. And so people end up either get excited or get disappointed based on what's happening. So if you're wanting the snow and you're wanting to, see the storm come in from the southwest corner to the northeast corner, those are the areas that are going to have the highest impacts. But the whole state will feel the cold. The whole state's going to get some rain and snow. But it's that southwest to northeast trend that the heavier moisture is going to fall today. Really, it's going to be heaviest late tonight, tomorrow into Wednesday morning. I think the main event's going to be tomorrow.
Well, it was cool to hear you chime in on that Renee Jean's story as well, to point out another story. If you were walking around with a pocket full of silver iodide last month, you'd have nothing to do with it, nowhere to throw it up in the air and have it catch anything. Maybe today you could do some cloud seeding.
Well, yeah, as the story indicates, cloud seeding is not easy. It's not very well known how really effective it is. But I tell you, I get on social media and read some things that people say, and there's just a basic lack of understanding on how much weather modification we can do. There's been experiments in cloud seeding operations for decades. There's been attempts made to try to manipulate the weather for a long time, and they're still trying it. But I will tell you this, no one's been effective at doing it. And the premise of, oh, well, you can just do this, we can do that and change the weather. I'm just skeptical. I'm sorry. I just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
And I know that makes a lot of people mad. I'm not making friends by saying that, but I've got to be honest and I've got to be scientific, and I just don't see it.
Yeah. You're going to be a lot more successful in forecasting weather rather than making weather. So we'll settle for that. Don Day is the best at forecasting weather. Other people can go out there and think they're making it, I guess. Don, have an awesome day. Let's check in tomorrow because I think a lot of stuff is going to change over the next 24 hours. We need you again.
See you then.
All right. Don Day weather is where you get the weather forecast. And Don doesn't make the weather, just reports the weather. And yeah, weather is coming. For sure. And I guess, he's going to have to stick with this weather forecasting thing because the truck driving may not be in his future. What's going on this day in history? Let's check in with that. There's a pretty cool guy that you may not know by name, but he's an interesting dude, and he factors into this day in history. Yeah, let's cover him now. I don't have a good photograph to go with this story. I should try to find one, but this is going back quite a while. It was this day in history, October 28th, 1868. And once again, my favorite go-to website for this day in history is just completely wrong. So it's a good thing that I do double-check these, fact-check these for you. My Wyoming, this day in Wyoming history had it October 28th, 1928, but that would be far too late for this story, which concerns the first Albany County sheriff. He was a rancher named N.K. Boswell. Now, Sheriff Boswell may not ring a bell for you, but this guy was a one-man gang when it came to cleaning up Laramie back in the day. This is 1868, not 1928. October 28th, 1868, Sheriff Boswell led a committee, otherwise known as a lynch mob, organized a vigilance committee, and tried to clean up Laramie. Laramie was fairly lawless in the 1860s, and Boswell led this committee and, in fact, had the committee go right into a tavern, Bucket of Blood. You've probably heard of this saloon. Many Western movies have borrowed the term, but there was an actual saloon in Laramie called the Bucket of Blood, and it was Sheriff Boswell who stormed right in there and pulled a few guys out and strung them up on the end of a rope. The frontier town Laramie suffered from lawlessness through the 1860s. The first mayor they had, M.C. Brown, quit. He said, I can't fix this place. He was in office for 6 weeks. And during that time, he said, I've got my fellow elected officials that are fairly corrupt. He said they're guilty of laxity in dealing with the city's problems. Many of the elected officials early in Laramie just were not only ineffective, but turned a blind eye to crime or were in on it themselves. And we're talking about 3 half-brothers that were the baddest of the bad. The early Old West gunman Big Steve Long, Con Meyer, and Ace Moyer. They were 3 brothers who owned the saloon Bucket of Blood. Those 3 began harassing settlers, forcing them to sign over deeds to their property. Anyone who refused was killed, usually goaded into a gunfight by Big Steve Long. By October of 1868, Long had killed an estimated 13 men in the saloon. And finally, Albany County rancher N.K. Boswell was hired as the sheriff, and Boswell went right to work. His vigilance committee cleaned out the town of Laramie through the end of the rope or the other end of a gun. With a large following of admirers and friends encouraging him, Boswell accepted the job as city marshal of Laramie. In August of 1876, he arrested Jack McCall. McCall was the infamous murderer of Wild Bill Hickok in Denwood. He sent McCall to the gallows. Boswell was also in office when Big Nose Parrott, George Parrott's gang, killed a couple of law enforcement men. And it was Boswell who captured 4 of the key members of George Parrott's gang, and under creative interrogation was able to learn the location of George Big Nose Parrott and his partner Dutch Charlie. Found out they were in Montana. He wired the sheriff there. They were arrested, and then Big Nose faced justice. So this guy did a lot of cleanup, and it was this day in history, October 28th, 1868, that the first Albany County Sheriff, rancher N.K. Boswell, organized his vigilance committee. Also on this day in 1982, in Casper, President Reagan spoke at a rally for Senator Malcolm Wallop. It's this day in history, October 28th. Let's cue up our next story of the day from the Cowboy State Daily right after this quick message. We'll be right back. Cowboys. I think tomorrow we're going to get with Jen Coker, although she said something about being out of town until November, so we'll see. But Jen has a great story. She dropped in on one of the many statewide coffee clatches, these morning sessions with regular morning sessions, usually once a week, sometimes once a day. This one Jen took in was in Gillette. It's a meeting of the OFS, the Old Farts Society, primarily Republican, heavily right-leaning group of young men, with the exception of one guy who might go a little left here. The OFS meets regularly in Gillette. And Jen Coker's story captures a real feel for this coffee clatch. I feel like I'm there when I read the story. These guys have been meeting at a place called The Local Coffee Shop in downtown Gillette since the late 1980s. And most of the guys are not shy about their right-leaning politics, which one man, Butler, said is shared by all of the group's members except for Doc, who got a little left the other day. But I like where these guys' heads are at for the most part. And it concerns, of course, politics. All these coffee clatches seem to be politically minded. But it also picks up topics like taxes. I want to talk about that in a minute. Meanwhile, Jen said while she was there to do the story on these OFS, these Old Fart Society, she noticed a table next door, like one table over, and right there was an all-female table. 4 white-haired women sit huddled over their cups of coffee. They, too, meet at 8 a.m. at the Local. But that's about all they have in common with the OFS. Jen couldn't get any of them to share their name, but they did verify that, well, they're not leaning as far right as their male counterparts. In fact, one woman said that if Trump wins the election, she'll consider moving to Norway. They wouldn't say they'll go as far as voting for Harris, but they did say they're much more liberal than their OFS counterparts. Meanwhile, the Old Fart Society, they railed a lot on taxes lately. And I'm with you. George Dunlap said, I probably pay 40 to 50% of every dollar I make on taxes between sales tax, license plates, property tax. I mean, we spend so much money in tax, it's ridiculous, said George Dunlap. Most of the group, the OFS, Coffee Clatch, and Gillette, says the city should stick to providing essential services, build what they can afford to maintain instead of relying on taxes from coal mines. That's a common theme throughout Wyoming. You find a lot of older gentlemen who say that the city should live within its means as far as funding. City government has just a few jobs. Make sure the toilets flush. Make sure the potholes are filled. And that's about it. If you get beyond that, you're overtaxing the peoples. Halloween is a good time to show an example of taxes for kids, especially. When your kid comes back with trick-or-treat candy and dumps the bag on the table, all you got to do is take about a third of that or more, sweep it off the table and drag it into your own bag, and the kid will be shocked. You say, wait a minute. You just took almost half my candy. You say, yep, and that's what the government's going to do with your earnings one day. Good tax lesson, kids. Another tax going on that's not got everybody in agreement. Fremont County residents and visitors. There's a certain group in Fremont County that wants to fight to kill tax grants to private businesses. This movement got started quite a while ago and is gaining steam in this election cycle. The Axe the Tax Group is trying to kill this economic development and transportation since April 2021. During that time, residents and visitors have contributed $7 million of their tax dollars into this Economic Development and Transportation Services Fund, and that money has then been doled out to help economic development. But some folks aren't happy about what economic development it helps and would like to do away with the tax altogether. Beginning with State Senator Cal Case, Republican lander, he told with the Cowboy State Daily last Friday, he told Claire McFarland there's an overall problem with subsidizing private business with government funds. Government has programs all the time, I know that, but this is very specific and very targeted and very wrong. And it's based on the sort of faulty feeling that government can do a better job spending your money than you can. Hear, hear, Senator Case. Couldn't agree more. We're probably going to go into a Jake's take. Yeah, we
The
better.
views and opinions expressed on the Cowboy State Daily Morning Show are solely those of its host and do not necessarily represent those of Cowboy State Daily's reporters, editorial staff, or ownership.
Kind of on the riffing off Senator Cal Case's idea that, once you start taking tax money and giving it in grants to businesses, you're obviously deciding how best to spend money. And that's where you get into a tricky area. And I'll just give you an example. This news was, it came in the newspaper last week. You probably didn't even notice it. Actually, it goes back a couple weeks. And it probably went largely unnoticed. I didn't see a lot of people getting all worked up about it. The Biden administration announced $750 million investment into a North Carolina chip maker called Wolfspeed. And at surface value, reading the headline, there's nothing that really jumps out at you. Maybe the Biden-Harris administration announced plans 2 weeks ago to provide up to $750 million in direct funding to a semiconductor developer and manufacturer called Wolfspeed. The money's going to be used to support the company's new silicon carbide factory in North Carolina. This factory makes wafers used to make better use of computer chips. But here, if you dig a little more into the story, I'm wondering, well, why do you pick Wolfspeed? What about other companies making silicon chips? What about other semiconductor manufacturers? Why does Wolfspeed win? And that's something the federal government decides all the time in issuing grants. They have to make those decisions all the time. Well, why do you get the grant Wolfspeed and someone else didn't? Well, the explanation from the Biden administration is, quote, artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, clean energy, they're all technologies that will define the 21st century. And thanks to proposed investments in companies like Wolfspeed, the Biden-Harris administration taking a meaningful step toward reigniting the U.S. manufacturing of chips and basically taking a chunk out of what China does. China makes a whole mess of chips and floods the market with them. But why do you give it to this one company? I'll tell you why. Because it's in the heart of a battleground state. Notice the timing. 2 weeks ago, right in the middle of a presidential election campaign. Biden-Harris administration says, here's to $750 million, Wolfspeed. This is a North Carolina-based company in the heart of North Carolina, which is going to be a huge player in the 2024 election. Trump narrowly won North Carolina in the 2020 presidential election. And it's a state that's up for grabs, one of the few battleground states. So why not drop a whole chunk of change on North Carolina, especially right now in the middle of a presidential election? Seems like a smart move, an influencing move. But I'm with Senator Cole Case. When the government decides who gets money and who doesn't out of our tax money, I have to question why the government's even involved in the private sector at all. Coffee Klatch in Gillette, the OFS, Old Fart Society, is along the same lines where, they're not too thrilled with taxes in general. Good story from Jen Coker. And we'll talk to her, I hope, tomorrow and get a little more info about her sit-in with the Coffee Klatch in Gillette. Haunted Wyoming? Yeah, I want to go right to this story. Where's my spooky music stuff? No, that's not spooky. Yeah, this one. Haunted Wyoming, Sweetwater County Library has got some weird things going on. Jackie Dorothy's got the news for you. If it sounds like the movie Poltergeist, yeah, there are similarities. The Sweetwater County Library was built on an old cemetery. That's never good. That's always the beginning of a scary movie. Jackie Dorothy's story, Sweetwater County Library. The lights have been known to flicker on and off by themselves. Books are tossed to the floor from the shelves. Whispers, crying heard when nobody is around. Welcome to the Sweetwater County Library in Green River, Wyoming, a building that has the misfortune of having a cemetery as its foundation. After experiencing strange occurrences herself, librarian Mickey Gilmore dug into the history and the whole issue. In fact, Gilmore has now come out with a book about it. She learned so much, but what she found out was that the library was built over a cemetery. Now, some of the grave sites were moved and reinterred somewhere else in the new cemetery about 60 years ago, but not all of them. Some of them still remain underneath the library. Weird, spooky. Graves discovered. This story, yeah, it's kind of ghosty. Definitely. And this is the librarian, by the way. She's written a book. She did the research. Mickey Gilmore said she's experienced some of these spooky things herself, and in researching found out enough info that she wrote her own book, Spirits in the Stacks, and found out about the cemetery that the building sits on top of. It's not the first time. There's a couple of times actually that people tried to build things over the top of this cemetery. And it's finally the library that sits over it now. But according to her research, in 1892, the cemetery was established to deal with mostly epidemics. And between the time period, the 1860s to the 1890s, this cemetery was filled up mainly with railroad workers dying in the smallpox epidemic. According to old timers like Edna Everett, when it came time to move these grave sites to accommodate new development on the land site, workers refused to dig up the bodies. They feared the disease would come out again, the smallpox. So a lot of times the graves were left there and the cemetery was built on top of it. Like 1930s, a park was put on top of the cemetery. In 1944, a temporary housing project was built for World War II veterans, and during construction of this, more bodies were uncovered and moved to the Riverview Cemetery. Finally, in the late 1970s, the fateful decision was made to build the town's new library over the top of the old grave site. And once again, as construction began in 1978, more bones were found. They tried to move what they could, but authorities acknowledged there was probably many graves that still are underneath the Sweetwater County Library in Green River. Ew. Yeah, that's the beginning of every horror story, right? Cat needs to be let out, so I'm going to have to take another break here. Let's check in with the Western Egg.
Hi, and welcome to the Rodeo Roadshow. I'm Will Rasmussen on the Western Ag Network. Today, the number one bareback rider in the world headed to Las Vegas and the National Finals Rodeo, 20-year-old Rocker Steiner. And we talked today about his water sports that he is absolutely terrific on. He water skis barefoot. We'll talk to the young star on the Roadshow when we come back.
Are you concerned about the impact government policies could have on your cattle business? One way to make your voice heard in Washington is by joining NCBA. When you join, you'll be part of the nation's oldest and largest national cattle industry organization that has a professional team working in Washington, D.C. on issues that matter to cattle-producing families nationwide. Don't stay on the sidelines. Make your voice heard by joining NCBA today at the website ncba.org.
If you are looking for regional or national ag news or livestock markets, the weekly Wyoming Livestock Roundup is just what you need. I'm Dennis Sun, publisher of the Wyoming Livestock Roundup. We also have a classified ad section for you to buy, sell, or find ag equipment, livestock, land, or everything you need for the ranch or farm. Please call 1-800-967-1647 to place an ad or receive a free 6-week subscription.
So I want to go back a few years before we get into the rodeo thing, and I've heard stories, and I know they're true about the water skiing thing. You don't use skis when you water ski. It's just your feet. Talk to me about when that began and how that all started.
Well, my family has always been a real big water skiing family. Back when my dad and uncle were kids, they were real big into the 3-event world, which is it's slalom skiing, trick skiing, and jumping. So they, my dad and uncle competed in that when they were kids, and so naturally, when I was a little kid, I started, I would see my dad and granddad and uncle barefoot, and I always wanted to do it. Well, I didn't try it until I was 6. 6 is about as as young as you can get going. So I started barefooting at a real young age. I grew up on Lake Austin, so we were always waking up in the morning, and I would go barefooting with my granddad and my dad. And so yeah, I've been on the water, my whole life. I've done pretty much every water event other than slalom skiing. I never competed barefooting, but I've always loved it, and that's always been one of my favorite things to do on the water.
I'm Will Rasmussen on the Western Ag Network.
Yeah, thank you, Will. Western Ag Network, Rodeo Roadshow. Rodeo Stars Water Skiing. What do they think of next? It's the Cowboy State Daily Morning Show with Jake, 7:54. 6 in front of the hour. We'll get an update on Don Day's weather forecast here in just a second, but suffice to say, you're going to have weather changes today throughout the state. Many of us can experience a sunny to partly sunny start to the day, and it may be nice getting into the 60s in some places or warmer, but it's going to be breezy, and that means something's blowing in. That something is going to be some shower activity, some rain beginning for many of us in the afternoon, rain turning snow overnight for most of us, and depending on where you are in Wyoming, you'll experience the worst or best of it, as Don Day explained. Very defined weather pattern moving in, very defined front. So some of the state will get rain and snow or both, and some of the state will hardly get any of that. Here's Don Day with more on today's weather.
Well, we have winter weather advisories and winter storm watches in effect for portions of northern and western Wyoming and into the Black Hills as we head into the next 48 hours, because a strong Pacific cold front is marching its way from the Pacific Northwest, and it's just now entering far northern and northwestern areas of Wyoming today. Now, tonight, tomorrow, and into early Wednesday, cold, moist weather will spread northwest to southeast across Wyoming, bringing snow to all of Wyoming's mountain ranges, and some rain, then turning to snow and much colder temperatures on the plains. Now, amounts of snow are going to vary depending on where you are. It looks like the heaviest snowfall will be in the high country, so hunters be advised of that, especially tonight through Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. We will have some travel concerns on some roads, highways, and mountain passes as well.
On your weather forecast for today, be warned. Let's go to Jackie Dorothy's story about this cool B-17 bomber. This was the workhorse, obviously, back in the day. And this bomber makes its final flight, I think, from Michigan to California. It's going to be restored, although, I mean, it looks fine to me. I'm confused as to why the restoration needs to happen. Let me share this story with you in the photo and take a look at this B-17 bomber. This particular plane did not see action in the war, World War II, but planes like it did. The final flight of the Yankee Lady over her home airport. So this plane flew from Michigan after being sold to a buyer in California. And, oh, look at that shot. I mean, this plane looks like it's in really good shape. Here it is. I think here it is taking off from Michigan. It flew over Wyoming at... from most of its flight, it was almost hard to track it. It did not track, 30,000 feet like most of your commercial airlines. It flew at about 2,000 feet over sea level, except for Wyoming, where it had to gain some elevation just to get up and over stuff. But here's a little bit of a video from, I believe, the tarmac in Michigan as it gets ready to take off.
Quiet.
Yeah, that's the final flight of the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress Yankee Lady. She makes her final journey across the western states of America. Left her former home at the Michigan Flight Museum, headed to California, where the buyer will then send that plane on to New Zealand, where a vintage aircraft restoration company will disassemble the plane and then fix it back up and make it truly restored, although it looks pretty nice to me. But I think the pilot who flew it mentioned that he's like, this is nothing like your aircraft that you're flying in today, a nice quiet ride. This is a noisy, loud, belching fuel kind of a plane ride. Corrick told our own reporter the story, by the way, Jackie Dorothy. Corrick said it's kind of loud. It's got vibrations. It's the opposite effect of getting on any sort of airliner today. It smells like aviation fuel. It's got giant props turning. It's a different experience. But for many ace pilots back in World War II, it was the go-to plane. This plane was featured in the movie Tora, 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 and was recently purchased by a California man from the museum and is now just made its last flight successfully, by the way, from Michigan to California. Flew over Wyoming over the weekend. And one guy saw it flying. Matt Corrick said it was a really cool experience to watch on the flight trackers. The majority of the flight, at least across the plains, it flew at about 2,000 to 2,500 feet above sea level, which is very visible if you were to look up and see the plane. But then, of course, when it got out west and you got more mountains, he said you could hear it coming. It was a very distinct sound. And by the time it crossed Wyoming, it was 10,000 feet above sea level in order to get over some of the mountains here. But the final flight of this historic B-17, the Yankee Lady, was made over the weekend over Wyoming. In case you wondered what that plane, in case you thought maybe it had gone back in time, that plane was on its way to California. So it was not a haunted story, very legit story. Jackie Dorothy has it for us, and we'll talk to her tomorrow and learn more about that pretty cool flight over the weekend. Let's take a quick break, get to the top of the hour news with Wendy Core.
It's time to take a look at what's happening around Wyoming. I'm Wendy Core, bringing you stories from the Cowboy State Daily Newsroom for Monday, October 28th. Almost a month after the elk fire began its race across the eastern face of the Bighorn Mountains, not only aren't homes being threatened anymore near Dayton and Parkman, but firefighting crews are now using terms like full containment when referring to what's grown to be a nearly 97,000-acre late-season wildfire. That's according to Cowboy State Daily's Greg Johnson.
It's a big relief for everybody up there. But again, the fire's not out, so they're not totally unaware of what's going on. However, they're no longer threatened that they have to leave their homes or anything like that.
Fire officials report that 2 people lost their homes and some lost cabins, and many ranchers lost grazing pastures. The historic Grable Hotel started out as the First National Bank, but when the bank went under prior to the Great Depression in 1927, Joe Carey, who made his money supplying illegal liquor to the residents, bought the building and turned it into a hotel. Cowboy State Daily's Jackie Dorothy visited the historic building and spoke to its current owner, Miles Foley, not about Carey's rum running, but about the supposed ghosts that still haunt the halls.
I wouldn't say it was heavily haunted, but it was definitely something there. And down in the speakeasy, just like Miles Foley, the owner, was saying, is that it feels like a cheerful place. There's no oppression, nothing. It just feels like you're back in the 1920s with these people that are enjoying life.
Foley said that the spirits that still linger at the Grable Hotel aren't sinister. Laughter has been heard, and those voices from the past still greet patrons today. The horror of mutilated cattle with no visible signs of predation made big, bold headlines across Wyoming and the West in the mid-1970s. Cowboy State Daily's Dale Killingbeck took a look back at the mysterious, almost otherworldly happenings and said that for some folks, the horror of it still hasn't gone away.
What surprised me was that there's still cattle mutilations going on. There were some in Oregon and Texas a couple of years ago. Talking to the sheriff from the county in southwest Wyoming, where where he was on the ground. He investigated those mutilations. He said they had evidence of rotor wash. They saw where helicopters had landed. So for him, this story is not about UFOs, but his suspicion was it was something to do with the U.S. government, U.S. military.
The Casper Star-Tribune reported in October of 1975 that suspected cattle mutilations surpassed 45 cows, with 10 in Sublette County alone and 16 in Uinta County. I'll be back with more news right after this.
Are you fabulous and 55? Are you ready to use your valuable time and talent to give back? Join Serve Wyoming through the AmeriCorps Seniors Retired and Senior Volunteer Program, or RSVP, and make a positive impact on your community. With a lifetime of skills and experiences, you're exactly what your community needs. Whether you're itching to lend a hand or your organization could use some extra support, we've got you covered. Call Sarah Roberts at Serve Wyoming at 307-234-3428 or RSVP at servewyoming.org.
If the 1884 walls at Bohemian Metals in Cheyenne could talk, oh, the tales they'd tell. But most of its stories seemed destined to remain a mystery until one day, out of the blue, the store's owner, Brian Snyder, got a message from a San Diego history buff whose grandfather was one of the original owners. Cowboy State Daily's Renee Jean spoke to Mike Hennessy, whose grandfather, Abraham Underwood, was a mover and shaker in the railroad town of Cheyenne.
The Bohemian Metals building. And then next door, you've got the steel looking shop that used to all be part of one building. And it was built by the Knights of Pythias, a fellow named Justice, and then this A. Underwood.
Underwood history is still being revealed, and it's been fun for both Hennessy and Snyder to fill in some of the blanks about the building, illuminating the story of one of Wyoming's early settlers. And Cody residents Greg and Tammy Poley are trying to find a new home for a cabin sitting on their property along the South Fork Highway. The ramshackle structure might be a relic from a community submerged over a century ago. But as Cowboy State Daily's Andy reports, its history is a mystery.
This cabin possibly came from the community of Marquette, which is basically Wyoming's Atlantis. It was a community that was sitting behind the spot where the Buffalo Bill Dam would be built, and then it was eventually flooded by the Buffalo Bill Reservoir.
The Poleys say they were told that the cabin was the post office for the town of Marquette, but until they find out more, its origins will remain a mystery. And that's today's news. Get your free digital subscription to Wyoming's only statewide newspaper by hitting the daily newsletter button on cowboystatedaily.com. I'm Wendy Corr for Cowboy State Daily. Cowboy State Daily is all about Wyoming. Daily features include our popular sunrise photo of the day, our daily Darwin, Same Guys Dancing, and more. You'll enjoy our regular Wyoming life features, daily video newscasts and podcasts, and frequent opinion pieces from a carefully curated collection of the state's finest columnists. All of this in addition to the core mission, providing statewide news coverage in a clear, plain manner with up-to-the-minute breaking news when and where it happens. Cowboy State Daily's collective of reporters, photographers, videographers, and editors are dedicated to quality, unbiased daily journalism here in Wyoming. Find out why Cowboy State Daily is considered Wyoming's largest and most experienced newsroom. All it takes is one visit, cowboystatedaily.com.
The Cowboy State Daily is Wyoming's largest news source. Now at fifth, what number do we just hit? Some congratulations are in order for our latest milestone. I got to go to Facebook just to see what number we hit lately. It's changing fast, I'll tell you that. Cowboy State Daily. We got a lot of Facebook followers. I can't get the internets to work in a timely fashion. Picking up a story from last week and just following up one last thread of the Grizzly 399. What to do with Grizzly 399? Is it possible to cremate this bear? And if that's the option chosen by National U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, along with the National Park Service, if they decide to go that route. Cowboy State Daily story from Andrew Rossi says at least one outfit in Powell says they could indeed cremate something the size of a grizzly bear. Cremated in the past horses and other large animals. Great story from Andrew Rossi, and again trying to flesh out the whole story and work it out with Grizz 399. That'll be the last thing that's decided what to do with the body. Grizz 399's Queen of the Tetons, Fish and Wildlife Service said they have the body in decent shape, trying to figure out what to do with it. And as social media talks about potentially cremation, scattering the ashes, Paul Davis, owner of Yellowstone Pet Cremations in Powell, says Grizz 399 is welcome to come here. Davis told Cowboy State Daily, we would love to be a part of that end-of-life procedure with her. Pet Cremations offers cremations in the Bighorn Basin with a 650-pound capacity crematory. Davis cremates everything from house cats to hamsters to horses, usually within 3 hours. 1,400 degrees, I guess, will do that. We've done probably a dozen full-size quarter horses, goats, miniature ponies, things like that. Davis advocates for horse cremation, seeing it as a better way to ensure a dignified disposal for that beast of burden that meant something to an owner or a family. One reason cremation works for animals that have been euthanized, and I didn't think of this. Davis says, think about a horse. Very often the horse would go to a landfill or a dump. Maybe that's not a proper death for one of your good buddies, so cremation is an option. Also, for an animal that's been euthanized, you got to be careful with the meat after that. Veterinarians use a large amount of drugs when they kill a horse, says Davis. And when an euthanized animal is disposed of improperly, that puts at risk coyotes, foxes, eagles, hawks, owls, anything that would eat on the carcass. They're now subject to whatever euthanasia drug that vet used on the horse. So, yeah, that's a situation. Certainly not going to be the situation with Grizz 399, but it's something to consider. And Andrew Rossi with a story that if 399 goes the route of cremation, there's a company up in Powell that stands ready to do the job. Hoping to get Leo Wolfson in the Zoom room to talk about his story that dropped, I think, last Friday or over the weekend about early voting across Wyoming being off to a brisk pace, hot and heavy, he says. A lot of early voting taking place in the state of Wyoming already. Leo Wolfson joining us in a little bit. We'll also talk this hour with Sally Ann Shermer, trying to figure out what's wrong with our Cowboys. Wyoming, another heartbreaking loss, this time a last-minute field goal from Utah State. And Wyoming remains with just that one thin win. And things do not look good for our Wyoming Cowboys. Ouch. Tough deal for the brown and gold. But yeah, it's a time, as Greg Johnson said at the top of the show, it's a time to find out who the real fans are. No time to be jumping off the bandwagon. Speaking of University of Wyoming Cowboys, great story from Renee Jean, who talked to Logan Wilson. And those of you who follow your NFL, certainly Cincinnati Bengal fans, you know Logan Wilson. Those of you who Our Wyoming Cowboy fans, you'll remember not long ago that Logan Wilson was a star linebacker for the Wyoming Cowboys. After being drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals, signed a lucrative contract. That's where he earns his living now, in Cincinnati, playing for the Bengals. But he says no matter where he is or where he's been and goes, the middle linebacker for the Bengals said he still remains a Casper boy at heart. In fact, he's been involved in the latest tourism campaign. The campaign is #VisitCasper, and in that campaign, you'll see many quotes from Logan Wilson, who says, "Fall is one of the best times to visit Casper," he wrote in a recent Instagram. Plenty of outdoor recreation opportunities to enjoy while the colors change, indoor activities to warm up with. He and his wife, Morgan, still get back to Casper often. She is from the Front Range down in Colorado, and he's from Casper. So whenever they come home to see family, they make it a point to try to get up to Casper. Logan Wilson told Cowboy State Daily's Renee Jean, "I have always tried to stay true to my roots. My wife is from 3.5 hours down the road at Longmont, Colorado, so it makes sense for us to be in the Casper area where we can see family as much as possible." And Logan Wilson said Casper is one of the more underrated ski towns out west. Lift tickets are cheaper, lines are shorter, and the views on Casper Mountain just as scenic as they are anywhere else. Logan Wilson's been everywhere. And he really values the fact that in Wyoming, particularly in Casper, but really in a lot of places in Wyoming, you are a short drive from just being out in the hills, out in the forest. Here is Logan Wilson right here doing his day job, middle linebacker for the Bengals. But here is Logan Wilson doing his Wyoming thing back in the day. Yeah. He's a hunter, enjoys the outdoor activities. There he is, sitting with his wife, Morgan. Yeah, Logan, looking every bit Wyoming. Nice. And pretty cool of him to take time to talk with Renee Jean about his ties to Wyoming. And despite his fame and fortune with the Cincinnati Bengals, he'll always remain a true Wyoming guy. I love it. So even though I'm not a big fan of the Cincinnati Bengals, I'll have to admit I'll follow Logan Wilson just because a former Cowboy and always a Cowboy at heart. Well, I'm not sure where Leo's at. We'll take a little break here, see if I can. All that with Leo Wolfson. Let's find out where his loyalties lie. Are you in mourning over the Cowboys' loss Saturday? Utah State. Also, Leo, what about Logan Wilson? That's a pretty good, cool story we had. Former Wyoming Cowboy. You said Casper will be near and dear to him.
Yeah, it's awesome to see the success that he's had. It just goes to show that, you can go to UW and make it to the NFL and have a successful career in the NFL on top of that, and stay true to yourself, which is what he did. So cool to see that. The current Cowboys, unfortunately, as you were mentioning, are not as inspirational.
I don't know anyone on the current Cowboys that thinks their dream of making millions for the Bengals or anybody else is going to come true, but it could. So hang in there, play hard. You never know.
You never know. But yeah, tough to watch how the season has gone. It's kind of shocking.
Tough. We're in the middle of political season, though, and time winding down to the big Tuesday election. And every year, it seems, every political 4 years, every presidential election 4 years, we're reminded that, it's not all about that Tuesday really anymore. So many of us are early voting. How many have probably voted already in Wyoming? Do you have a firm grasp of that number, a guess, a ballpark? What do we know of people who have already cast their vote?
I can't give you like a total encompassing number, but I can tell you that it's a significant number, and it's definitely at this point far exceeded what we saw for the primary election for early voting. We have far smashed that out of the park, so that's at least a good sign. That's not a shocking achievement, all things considered. The presidential election traditionally draws the biggest voter turnout of all elections, and especially compared to a primary. But it's a very good sign, and one could maybe warrant that maybe 10% of the people who are going to vote have already voted, which might sound kind of small in the grand scheme of things, but that is actually somewhat significant. And then to say that nationwide too, what we're seeing is that it's looking like it's going to be a pretty good turnout overall nationwide for this election. So things are looking good. I think people really care about what's going on a national level, and I think they are also paying attention to the legislative races, at least in places like Cheyenne where there are competitive general election legislative races. And it just seems like there's a lot of enthusiasm, and people do care, which is good to see.
Yeah, and maybe this year, I know traditionally Wyoming, the idea that you're going to cast a vote for a president in Wyoming, some people feel like it's a wasted vote. Either your guy or gal is getting in no matter what, or he or she is not. And, so maybe there's a reason to not even show up or leave that blank. But a lot of times local races drive the vote out. But in this case with the presidential, you think people are, even though they think their vote may not affect the presidential race and who's going to get to the White House, at least they're in a controversial season in 2024. At least their vote has personal meaning. Maybe in the family, you have a house divided, the husband, the wife, the vote might mean something to you. There's no way in the world I'd vote for that one. I'm going to vote for this one. And it's important, even though you think it may not count in Wyoming.
Yeah, and I would say that although it's very true that Wyoming is probably not, is almost certainly not going to sway the direction of the overall result in this election, because it's seen as such a lock for former President Donald Trump, and the fact it's only 3 electoral votes. The people I've talked to in Wyoming that care about this election, I have not heard hardly anyone say to me, "Oh, I'm not going to vote because what does it matter? We're in Wyoming." I have not heard that sentiment. Of course, there's people out there that don't plan on voting, but I think the people that care about this election in Wyoming are going to be voting. I think that's the way they see some significance in it. The popular vote, although it doesn't really count towards anything in a literal sense, it does still hold a symbolic meaning. And I think people want to, if they support Trump here, they want to let it be known that at least their vote here went towards Trump. And I think furthermore, Wyoming voted for Trump with a larger margin than any other state in 2016 and 2020. And I think people here, at least Trump supporters here, are prideful of that. And I think that they want to hold on to that title to a certain degree if they can make a difference in that regard. And then there's people who don't like Trump here, who I most certainly could tell that they tell you that they're gonna vote for sure. And they know that Trump's going to win the state, but they want to make a statement. They want to let it be known that, hey, I'm one of the people in Wyoming that don't like Trump, and this is how many of us there are. That's absolutely their mentality. So yeah.
If it's a perceived meaningless vote at the presidential level, the same is true for legislature, except for a few contested races. But what about when you get hyper local and you talk about town councils and county commission? I mean, that could drive people to the polls. And Wyoming's turned out in general for general elections pretty good compared to other states.
Yeah, not bad at all. I think we're usually towards the top or the middle of the pack at the very worst. But yeah, absolutely. Great point, Jake. The county commission races and the city council races, the school board races, all the school board races are basically decided in this election rather than the primary because those are nonpartisan. So those are very, very critical to many people, locals in Wyoming. As you know, there's lots of really pretty heated races for the city council, especially in Jackson. That we've seen this fall for sure. It's in some ways, the primary gets a lot of the attention in Wyoming because that's when a lot of the partisan races are decided. But in some ways, the general election is kind of underrated in Wyoming. And I think a lot of people care about it quite a bit, too, because of not only the presidential, but as you're mentioning there, those hyper local races that a lot of people care about, especially if they're really involved in something that's going on in their city, or if they have a kid if they have kids in the school district currently, certainly you have a preference which people get elected to the school board.
Yeah, you think things get really divisive over POTUS? Just go to a school board like that tends to get people pretty passionate. What are you following this week? What are you working on? Still a lot of election stuff before we get to November 5th. That's probably the big driver right now in politics.
Absolutely, yeah. Of course, looking at that, it's interesting though because Wyoming has been kind of removed from a lot of the drama of the political race because it's such a guaranteed state for Trump that we haven't seen nearly as much probably attention as some of these battlegrounds. Like I can't even imagine what it's like being in Pennsylvania right now. I mean, I have a pretty good idea, but it's not like what we're experiencing here in Wyoming. From Wyoming, we're kind of watching from the sidelines. We're watching from afar, so it's a different perspective. But yeah. Looking at that, and then the constitutional amendment that's going before voters on November 5th. So that is basically the proposal to create a separate class of taxation for residential properties for property taxes. There's really a lot of chatter going on about that on social media and a lot of controversy. There's certain people who thinks it does one thing, and there's a group of people who think it does another thing, and it's becoming pretty contested, pretty heated. So I'll be definitely taking a look at that for sure.
Yeah, I think coffee clutches, we're following those around the state. I think that is a big topic. Property tax, huge. It's just more and more and more because everybody opens that envelope twice a year and you look at the sticker shock over your property taxes. It's important to a lot of people in Wyoming. That's going to be huge this time around and every election going on. Thanks, Leo, for covering all this, staying on top of it.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Jake.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Leo Wolfson, Cowboy State Daily politics reporter. And we'll move right to Sally Ann Shermer to talk about all things Laradice and University of Wyoming Cowboys. There is some good news on the campus on the sports front that do not involve football, so that's positive. I think the Cowgirls won in volleyball. Let's shift gears and do that next. Coming up with Sally Ann Shermer right after this, and we'll talk Wyoming college sports. Volleyball and other sports other than football, yeah. But we'll get some football as well. Coming right back.
Cowboy State Daily is all about Wyoming. Daily features include our popular sunrise photo of the day, our daily Darwin, Same Guys Dancing, and more. You'll enjoy our regular Wyoming life features, daily video newscasts and podcasts, and frequent opinion pieces from a carefully curated collection of the state's finest columnists. All of this in addition to the core mission, providing statewide news coverage in a clear, plain manner with up-to-the-minute breaking news when and where it happens. Cowboy State Daily's collective of reporters, photographers, videographers, and editors are dedicated to quality, unbiased daily journalism here in Wyoming. Find out why Cowboy State Daily is considered Wyoming's largest and most experienced newsroom. All it takes is one visit, cowboystatedaily.com.
Yeah, let's get Sally Ann Shermer right in here and talk Wyoming sports. Hi, Sally Ann. What's going on?
Oh man, rough weekend, huh?
I can't believe it. It seems like every week the Cowboys find a new way to lose. This one another heartbreaker. My goodness.
Woof.
Ouch.
And my sense is that so many people have said, "Oh, it was such a good game. We had such a good chance. We had a chance till the end."
Yeah.
And brutally honestly, because I'm brutally honest most of the time, I never felt like we had a really good chance to win. So, it's just a really tough time in Laramie, and it's a really tough time at UW, and it's a really tough time for everybody who loves the folks, and it's just really tough, So on we go, and to New Mexico on Saturday. But Coach Savell said he would make some changes, and he did. He held true to his promise. Caden Anderson did come in the first quarter, perhaps not at the time of the first quarter that people were hoping, but he did come in and showed some glimmers, and I think that's why some fans are more encouraged today than they have been on past Mondays, is because I think he showed some glimmers. But then for whatever mysterious reason, he didn't stay in. And so I'm trying to be sort of diplomatic here, but it's just a tough time. And then you read that other programs are firing coordinators and firing head coaches and not waiting till the end of the year to make a move. And these guys are in their first year. And frankly, I don't look for changes to be made because it's their first year. And, they're in long-term deals, and it's very expensive to get rid of a coach. I mean, you have to be really, really, really mad to get rid of a coach.
Yeah.
Because it's really, 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 really expensive. And so, it'll be interesting to see what the future holds. And beyond that, it's a really rough day. What was your take?
Well, glass half full. There were some positives in Bridger's battle. Wyoming recorded season high 470 yards total offense. That was good news.
Right. That was great news.
A lot of yards between the 20s, though. Red zone was problematic, and that means we had to call on John Hoyland, who had a great day. But when your kicker has 4 field goals and has a great day, you left a lot of points out there with touchdowns that you didn't realize. So I don't know. You're right. I wanted to ask you if you had that same sinking feeling all along. Not that the Cowboys, were going to pull this out and win it and were sort of in command. No, it just felt like it was just a progress towards how are we going to lose this one. And I didn't even have to watch the kicker for Utah State. I knew he was going to hit that, and that would be it.
Yeah.
And oh man.
It's just tough. I mean, it's just so heartbreaking when the game kicks off and you're just thinking, okay, how are we going to lose this one? Okay, we need to just go back and remember after Friday's little history lesson, this is history. This is historic. This is our 113th season, and only 13 times in 113 years have we only won one game. So we look at the schedule. We have 4 remaining. We're 2/3 of the way through the schedule now. And it seems like, a week ago we were talking about being halfway through, but now we're 2/3 of the way through the schedule. We have 4 games remaining at New Mexico, vastly improved under their new coach, vastly improved, although, they laid an egg Saturday, but they're vastly improved. They're scoring a ton of points. Even when they lose, they score a ton of points. So that's, at New Mexico. Then we get a bye. And I don't know what will happen during the bye week. Last bye week, it did seem to help because we got a lot of those injured guys back. They had surgery for pins in their hands, and then they came back and cast and the whole thing, the whole nine. So last bye week, we were all focused on the injuries. So this bye week will be between New Mexico and Boise State, and then the final home game, the Saturday before Thanksgiving. So the students will probably all be gone already. Saturday before Thanksgiving is, I'm ahead of myself. So after the bye, we go to CSU on Friday night. So Friday night Freakies in Fort Collins. That'll be scary as heck. They are really good, and I hate to say that, but they're very much improved. Then is Boise State. The Friday before Thanksgiving is Boise State. Then we go to Washington State, which is chopping it up on the West Coast. So what I'm trying to say is, tell me where we're going to win in those 4 games.
Yeah, there's not a win there. That's exactly what I was thinking, Sally Ann. Maybe University of New Mexico, the university as a whole, the athletics department is trying to pull the football team along with them. A 0-0 tie against New Mexico for the soccer team. So that's sort of hopeful. Yeah. And the Cowgirls beat New Mexico in 4 in volleyball. So, all right, the other sports are showing the way. Here's how you handle New Mexico. Can the Cowboys do it on the gridiron? I don't know.
Man.
And we're being rushed on. That's the thing. It seems like every opponent is able to run the ball on us, which I know that didn't used to be the case.
As from the start of this, that's what I've been saying is, people will take offense at this, and that's fine. But, the offense is the glamour shot, right? They have all the stars, and they have all the points, and they have all the, everything's about the offense, especially in the NFL, but leaking down to college as well, obviously. So everything's about the offense. Well, our offense in the past, aside from Josh Allen, has not been fantastic recently, right? It's just never been fantastic. Yeah. But our defense has been Wyoming tough defense. And that is what we have hung our hat on. And that's what I personally have been so thrilled to be a fan of, is our defense. Well, by and large, these are what the troubles are. But from the very first game at Arizona State, when it looked like the defense was not on the field and there were just these giant wide valleys of field available for the Sun Devils to run through, I don't understand what's happening. I just don't understand it. And that's the single issue that is the most heartbreaking. And to think that Jay Savell is a defensive guy, Craig Bohl was a defensive guy, and to think that Jay Savell is a defensive guy. And I think that that's one reason why, we can be critical of this and talk about this for a very long time, but the progression is what it is. And why the selection was made is because, the defense would be carrying through, because it was Jay Savell's defense, and Jay Savell was now going to be the head guy. Well, something happened, and I'm not smart enough to have the answers, but something happened, and the defense has just not been what we've been accustomed to the Wyoming defense being, and that's the sad part. I think that that's the really sad part. So we'll see.
We're talking to Cowboy State Daily columnist Sally Ann Shermer, who's known throughout the state for her passionate football following, and she was there in Laradice Saturday. That was an afternoon game. Was it a nice night though? Right, weather-wise,
it was gorgeous.
Yeah,
it was absolutely gorgeous. And so here we go. Full disclosure, I don't have to tell you this, but I'm going to tell you I was not there. I've been having some health struggles, and so I did not go. And I watched every second on TV, and sometimes I really honestly think you get a clearer picture on TV, of the whole field and of the whole thing. But it was a gorgeous night, and apparently the crowd was about 18,000, I heard, which is significantly less than the other 4 games, but I guess that's what you have to expect. But it was a gorgeous night, and I know the people there had a good time, and not everybody gets as rolled up as I do about the results, and I think it was a great night for football, and it was Military Appreciation Night and the halftime show. I know the band Western Thunder did a fantastic job on the halftime show honoring the military, and it was a great night, except for what happened on the field. So.
Yeah, and what hurts more, I think, Sally Ann, we both come at the game from a defense-first standpoint, and we're used to seeing in Laramie, maybe a receiver who's wide open, but the throw, just overthrown, incomplete. I mean, that hurts. But what hurts worse, what really guts me, is watching the opponent running back who, he's had an average season, and all of a sudden against us, he looks like an all-star. And they just gutting the team in a 8-yard run, a 12-yard run. And before he's even touched, he's through a gaping hole. And you're like, that just can't. Those hurt you worse, though.
Well, we're making lots of players of the week, I'll tell you that. And and then the news comes out a half hour before kickoff that Utah State's best player isn't even going to play and is done for the year with a foot injury. And sure enough, there he is on the sidelines in a boot and on a knee walker thing, a little scooter chair thing. And it didn't matter. I mean, them not having him didn't matter a bit, And so you're right. I mean, it's just heartbreaking when the defense is not what you expect the defense at Wyoming to be. That is what's heartbreaking.
Yep. Tough Saturday for us all, but there's another Saturday around the corner. We're gonna stick with our Pokes. Go Pokes! Let's talk Friday about how we're gonna get our second win this weekend
and beat those Lobos. Okay, have a great week.
Got to. Thank you. You too. That's Sally Ann Shermer talking all things Cowboys. Yeah, the Pokes lost a heartbreaker, 27-25, last minute. Game-ending walk-off field goal for Utah State. Wyoming did some things well. They moved the ball offensively. Season high, 400-something yards on the ground. Just did not convert, did not translate into enough points. It was John Hoyland's show. Kicked 4 field goals, so that's 12 points where it could have been 28 points had you scored touchdowns. And, that was the reason for the season. 8:42 this morning in the Cowboy State Daily Morning Show with Jake, and we'll turn our attentions from sports to the next story, which is what is our next? I love this story from Andrew Rossi. Cody couple selling historic cabin thought to be part of Wyoming's Atlantis. I bet you didn't even know an Atlantis of sorts. The Buffalo Bill Reservoir, certainly you're familiar with that, and you've maybe traveled on your way from Cody. You've driven by the Buffalo Bill Reservoir. Well, it wasn't always it was a town underneath that water called Marquette. And you can't find it on any map today, but there was once a Marquette known as Wyoming's Atlantis. It's now submerged under Buffalo Bill Reservoir. And there's a cabin thought to be part of Marquette, thought to be maybe one time the post office. Our own Andrew Rossi has a little more info on that as he talked about the story. Let's get a little bit of that, and we'll fill in some more background in a moment.
Tammy Poley are trying to find a new home for a cabin sitting on their property along the South Fork Highway near Cody. The ramshackle structure might be a relic from a community submerged over a century ago. But as Cowboy State Daily's Andrew Rossi reports, its history is a mystery.
This cabin possibly came from the community of Marquette, which is basically Wyoming's Atlantis. It was a community that was sitting behind the spot where the Buffalo Bill Dam would be built, and then it was eventually flooded by the Buffalo Bill reservoirs. Old Trail Town, it preserves a lot of historic structures from the early settlement of Cody and the neighboring region. So that seems like it would be the natural place for it. But I spoke with them. It's very easily could have been in Marquette, but they couldn't confirm it, like the brothel that they opened this summer. They can trace the history of the brothel, but this cabin's a little more elusive.
The Poleys say they were told the cabin was the post office for the town of Marquette, but until they find out more about the structure's history, its origins will remain a mystery.
Yeah, just cool little history lesson there on Marquette. 15 small community 15 miles west of the city of Cody back in the day. When was it flooded? 1910. So there's been no Marquette since then. The police think, though, perhaps this cabin may have been the post office for Marquette back in the day, but no confirmation. There isn't much to look at, though. Here, let's get a photo of that cabin. I mean, like a good date from early 1900s, late 18. That is an old cabin. But is there any historical value to it? Andrew Rossi with a fantastic story. We'll talk to Andrew tomorrow live on the air and get more info about the stuff he's working on and the stories he told over the weekend, including a dinosaur story. If it involves dinosaurs, Andrew Rossi is on it. That's his beat. Anything old bones, Andrew's all over that. We'll hit him up tomorrow on the Cowboy State Daily Morning Show. Later this hour, or later next hour, about 9:15, we'll talk to Riley Strand about a fantastic story he has concerning Rock Springs and how it's basically built over a lot of empty coal mines. And that makes for some precarious footing. But as he said in his story, the folks at Rock Springs are used to hard times and nobody really gives it a second thought. This is, of course, Rock Springs community at one time was part of the Union Pacific's westward rail expansion, and Union Pacific needed coal to fuel their trains, and they found it in abundance in Rock Springs and hired a significant Chinese population to do the coal mining. In fact, in 1880, probably half the population in Rock Springs was Chinese. And things came to a head, tensions between old-time Wyomingites and new Chinese miners came to a head in 1885, caused riots to break out. Local miners targeting Chinese workers drove them out of town. The whole situation was known as the Massacre of 1885. 28 people killed. The Chinese were driven mainly to nearby Evanston. There was a time when the Union Pacific tried to go get the Chinese back to continue work in the coal mines, but they were unsuccessful. So the Union Pacific expanded its search for workers internationally. And it's a good reason why today in Rock Springs still there's great diversity in the population of Rock Springs. So many were imported in to work in the coal mines in order to fuel Union Pacific's westward rail expansion. Great story from Riley Strand exploring the history of Rock Springs, and he really captured a bunch of it. I want to share some of his video. This video is too cool to miss. We got to watch this. This is Riley Strand and the video work he did, the story, the documentary he put together involving Rock Springs. Fantastic work, Riley.
as the ground was settling under their houses, they're getting cracks in their foundations, and that would be a big problem. You know, your house foundation cracks, there's not much way you're going to resell it.
Abandoned coal mines, sinkholes opening up overnight in a town that lost its identity. We spent a day unearthing the history of Rock Springs.
Well, there's a sense of pride living here. You know, the wind blows a lot, it's hot in the summer, it's cold in the winter, the dust gets into everything. In terms of the coal mining history of Rock Springs, that pretty much ended in the late 1950s and early 1960s, and it's probably not coming back.
You wouldn't know it by passing through on I-80, but Rock Springs was once a pivotal hub for coal mining in the state of Wyoming. Not much was left behind after the final mine closed its doors. Historians like Dave Johnson play a big role in preserving the town's past.
The people who worked in the coal mines, most of those have passed away. Most of the people who are here now don't remember coal mining, had no connection to coal mining, except maybe it was something that their grandparents did.
What does remain mostly lies within the local city hall. Dave showed us inside.
Here is the mine entrance. We're probably somewhere right around in here right now. So these are square miles, so you can see it's going several miles from north to south.
Coal was discovered in Rock Springs in the late 1800s. By the turn of the century, Union Pacific had set up shop to fuel its ever-expanding rail network.
Most 19th century railroads need coal really badly to power their locomotives and stuff, so the Union Pacific Railroad built through Rock Springs, and that's what led to the mines being opened.
Dave isn't from Rock Springs. Originally from Minnesota, he came to Wyoming as a young archaeologist in the 80s. He found an unlikely outlet for his passion in the former coal town.
The work that I've done for DEQ involved recording historical mining sites, doing historical research on these sites, evaluating archaeological materials found within these sites, then determining their significance under the criteria found in the National Register of Historic Places. I ended up spending the next 40 years here when I expected to barely make. And see, there's another one that shows how the roofs are supporting, and once these columns, if they're not maintained after 50 years or more, they're going to rot away and they're going to be gone. There's nothing supporting the roof in their place except the roof itself, and down comes the roof.
There were 10 mines in the downtown area alone, with every tunnel that was ever dug having a potential for collapse, a problem that plagued in years past. Before we got into that, though, Dave wanted to show us around town.
This area here, this is where the P1 mine used to be. So it would be just kind of built right back. I think these buildings are not part of it, but they'd be right in this area. So all those tunnels are going off in that direction from here. Actually, the towns grew up around the mines rather than the mines growing up around the town. So if you're here at, in the 1890s, the city hall and the mine tipples will be pretty much dominating what you see, and everything else is going to be wood frame buildings, wood frame houses.
Rock Springs was a blue-collar town to find. Life wasn't easy, but the promise of steady work in the mines was enough to persuade people far and wide to make the trek to Wyoming.
A lot of these people were living in houses with poor central heating, poorly insulated. You know, there's some accounts of people living in company houses where you could look outside between the gaps in the siding. So it was kind of more a feeling of shared difficulties that kind of brought these people together. Mining was hard. You never knew when a wall might fall, or you might be involved in some accident. You were united by the difficulties you were sharing, than you were divided by whether you were from China or Japan or Italy or Croatia or whatever.
Lack of demand meant the industry couldn't be sustained. By the early 1960s, the final coal mine shut down operations, stripping a core identity from the town and its people.
It just devastated the town because that's all it had been for like 90 years or so, from 1869 to like 1950 or 1962 or so. So it just pretty much just tore the guts out of the town.
Our next stop was a tipple, a key piece of infrastructure for loading coal for further transport once it left a mine. Dave often gives tours of the site to visitors.
Yeah, I mean, every mine would have had some variation of this. It would be pretty much dominating the skyline of any coal mining town. This building was built in 1936. When this thing was in operation, the motors would be running, the shaker screens would be shaking and banging, dust would be coming up from the shaker tables. I mean, the thing would have been hot in the summer and cold in the winter, and full of coal dust all the time. So it would have been a rough place to work. Wondering what it would have been like if I could have seen what these people were doing 40 or 50 years in the past. I never did this work myself, but if you had like a time machine that you could look back and see what these people are doing, it would make my job a whole lot easier because I wouldn't have to try and figure it out from a scatter of artifacts and a bunch of newspaper articles to actually see what's happening.
Dave might not have been around to see the mines in operation, but he was present for the after effects of nearly a century of underground mining that took place right below the main streets.
This is where the big mine subsidence hole opened up. So it was a good 50, 60 feet long.
He's talking about subsidence, what happens when an abandoned mine shaft caves in, leaving everything above it in a rather precarious situation.
Probably about 20, 25 feet wide and up to 20 feet deep or more. Pretty much straight down too. It didn't slope. It just went straight down to where the old tunnel would have been.
Subsidence plagued Rock Springs ever since the beginning. The buildings affected range from City Hall to houses in the neighborhood.
When the subsidence hole opened right here in the street, a lot of the sand that was built around the foundation slumped away, and that allowed the building to start shifting. We were getting interior cracks in the walls, in the plaster walls inside, but we also started to see some cracks on the outside. And what that kind of tended to suggest was that the tower was maybe trying to separate from the west and north walls of the building. The thing about coal mines is that they are usually excavated into relatively soft rock. You needed some type of a serious framework just to keep the tunnels from collapsing because the rock was so soft. In a lot of cases, they would use wooden poles. As the area of the mining was played out, they're moving on to different areas, they would not keep replacing the wooden posts, they'd just be left to decompose, so there's no longer anything supporting the roof. So that was where subsidence comes in, is that the roof is no longer being supported by either wooden posts or coal pillars, depending on the rock that the roof consists of. This stuff can eventually collapse.
While most of the sinkholes have been repaired today, as recently as October of 2024, work was underway on I-80, which was built directly adjacent to old mine entrances. That project has since been completed. Although the mines in Rock Springs will never produce coal again, the legacy is hard to forget. With each new generation being farther and farther removed from the town's past, it's people like Dave who will continue to remind everyone of what once was and what continues to be.
Times change. Rock Springs is not the town it was 50 years ago. It's not the town it was 100 years ago or 150 years ago. Life goes on, things change, and people adapt to that change.
A great story from Riley Strand, told by our videographer, Cowboy State Daily. And I have been extra hard on Rock Springs, and I have heard it from the Rock Springs community. So maybe now is a chance to walk some things back I've said about Rock Springs. I'm always tough on them. Thursday, I had Rock Springs native Abby on the show, and I was kind of kidding her about Rock Springs, but it's a town of perseverance, a city built on shaky ground, as we find out. Subsidence, I did not know about that, but a city that has survived in Wyoming and just keeps on keeping on despite the mining gone and the railroad of lesser importance. There are cool things about Rock Springs. I love the Sweetwater Event Complex. I love that. The rodeo grounds there at Sweetwater. Very cool. Some good places to eat in Rock Springs. Yeah, I mean, Rock Springs, I won't be so hard on them after I've seen where they've come from, what they've had to go through. Comparing your home to a luxury resort is like comparing apples to oranges. So why are they being taxed the same? Amendment A proposes to allow our homes to be taxed at a lower, fairer rate. PAC 4, Wyoming urges you to vote yes on Amendment A as we get to big election day, November 5th. I know I see so many stories, and I wonder how much of it is media planted. I wonder how much of it is fake news planted by Russia, planted by China. I see headlines continue saying that there's going to be great anxiety coming on November 6th. There's going to be anarchy November 6th. And on the verge of civil war on November 6th. The day after we find out who is voted in, and it won't matter. There's people saying in the media that this country will be divided. This country will be at each other's throat come November 6th. There's people very, very legitimately worried about what it's going to be like to wake up on November 6th, that Wednesday, knowing that this person is now the president or that person. We'll talk about, some politics, maybe less so. I want to, the whole subject just chills me a little bit. But we got plenty more stories to come up in the next hour. We will talk to Riley Strand at 9:15, ask him what he thought about Rock Springs, and do a whole bunch more right after this. Let's start things off with the top of the hour news with Wendy Core.
It's time to take a look at what's happening around Wyoming for Monday, October 28th. I'm Wendy Core, bringing you headlines from the Cowboy State Daily Newsroom, brought to you by 4 Wyoming PAC. 4 Wyoming PAC says this November, Wyoming will vote to allow residential homes to be taxed at a lower, fairer rate, even the playing field, and give families a much-needed break. 4 Wyoming PAC wants you to vote yes on Amendment A. There are too many bison in Yellowstone National Park. That's what Yellowstone's bison them actually, and plans are to remove more than 1,300 over the winter in order to keep the herd within population ranges established by the Interagency Bison Management Plan. But wildlife advocates believe the long-term ecology of Yellowstone's bison is jeopardized by short-term decisions to cull the herds, which are perceived as political rather than scientific. That's according to Cowboy State Daily's Andrew Rossi.
The concerns are that, as the expert that I spoke to put it, we're gradually domesticating bison because we're keeping them confined to this space where their gene pool is being diluted because don't have the ability to expand into their historic range. So we're losing a part of the bison's wild nature because of this management plan. And that's not the fault of the National Park Service for implementing it. It's because of the conflicts outside the park that the bison would inevitably run into.
Through the work of the National Park Service, tribal partners, and conservation groups like the Montana Wild Bison Coalition, there are possible solutions to address this urgent issue. The stakes are high, as the consequence is losing wild bison forever. Well, Wyoming uses cloud seeding as an environmentally friendly way to squeeze a little more snow from clouds, boosting annual snowpack that feeds a little more water into its reservoirs to supply both cities and agriculture. But if this technique is used to help fight wildfires? Cowboy State Daily's Renee Jean, a scientist herself, went searching for the answer to that question.
In order to seed a cloud, you have to have a cloud. Cloud seeding does not conjure clouds for you. The reason we get rain is sometimes these little bits of water vapor are happy to get closer and closer and clump together, and they get heavy enough to fall. But sometimes they could care less about each other and they just keep their distance, and the clouds then just kind of dissipate and go away and we get no rain. This is where the cloud seeding can kind of come in and help. So you can shoot some silver iodide in there. That gives something that's going to help attract and clump together these little water particles so they'll finally fall out of the sky. There are months of studies that go into where do these ground cannons need to be aimed, how much iodide do they need to shoot. You can't do that kind of study in the middle of fighting a fire.
Jean says the dry air compounded the conditions that made this fire season so destructive. Even if cloud seeding had been an option that firefighters were prepared to implement, there were no clouds to seed during the worst of the fires. Well, nearly 4 weeks ago, the elk fire exploded by nearly 20,000 acres across the eastern face of the Bighorn Mountains in northern Wyoming and right toward the small town of Dayton. Fast forward almost a month later, and not only aren't people's homes being threatened anymore by what's grown to be a nearly 97,000-acre late-season wildfire, firefighting crews are now using terms like full containment and damage assessment, according to Cowboy State Daily's Greg Johnson.
It went from Friday, they had 58% containment on it, and by Saturday, it was at 73%, which is where they're still reporting it Sunday. The owner of the Parkman Bar and Grill says that, finally people are starting to think about getting back to normal. It's a big relief for everybody up there. But again, the fire's not out, so they're not totally unaware of what's going on. However, they're no longer threatened that they have to leave their homes or anything like that.
Fire officials report that 2 people lost their homes and some lost their cabins. Additionally, much winter pasture lands are gone for ranchers, as well as some summer pastures on the mountain. And now let's take a look at today's weather with Cowboy State Daily meteorologist Don Day.
Well, we have winter weather advisories and winter storm watches in effect for western Wyoming and into the Black Hills as we head into the next 48 hours because a strong Pacific cold front is marching its way from the Pacific Northwest, and it's just now entering far northern and northwestern areas of tonight, tomorrow, and into early Wednesday. Cold, moist weather will spread northwest to southeast across Wyoming, bringing snow to all of Wyoming's mountain ranges and some rain, then turning to snow and much colder temperatures on the plains. Now, amounts of snow are going to vary depending on where you are. It looks like the heaviest snowfall will be in the high country, so hunters be advised of that, especially tonight through Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. We will have some travel concerns on some roads, highways, and mountain passes as well.
You can get Don's full forecast on the Cowboy State Daily website. I'll be back in just 20 seconds with more news.
Comparing your home to a luxury resort is like comparing apples to oranges. So why are they being taxed the same? Amendment A allows our homes to be taxed at a lower, fairer rate than commercial properties. Vote yes on Amendment A.
Well, when longtime Denver TV expectedly in midlife, he wasn't worried until he couldn't get another job in his field because everyone kept telling him he was overqualified. So the Cheyenne man decided to do something completely different. Cowboy State Daily's Renee Jean reports that Orr took to the road, becoming a long-haul truck driver.
He just kept getting, you're overqualified, sorry, you're overqualified. Everywhere he went for like a year and a half. Finally, when he got kind of thinking outside the box, what can I do that's going to have this much salary so I can make ends meet? And that's when he noticed all these truck driving ads. Everybody's hiring truck drivers. There was a lot to learn, a lot of names. You have to do an inspection twice a day of your truck. So there's a lot to remember, but he's making more than he was before, probably more than he would ever get to in a media job. He hasn't given up storm chasing. He loved the meteorology gigs. He's turned that into kind of a hobby. He does little videos in his downtime.
Midlife job losses are tough, Orr said, and they can be harrowing experiences. But with persistence and an open mind, they can have a happy ending. Well, these days, some residents of Rock Springs don't know much about the town's legacy industry, even though the departure of coal mining gutted the community nearly 70 years ago. Until recently, unstable underground mines caused sinkholes that damaged city infrastructure. Cowboy State Daily's Riley Strand visited Rock Springs and spoke to a historian who took him on a tour of the town and its precarious position on top of a network of coal mining tunnels.
Sinkholes definitely did open up next to houses. There was the sinkhole that opened up right in front of City Hall. And there's not really much warning for a lot of this stuff. But as the historian told us, it wasn't like this big doom and gloom situation. The people in the town, they were used to living really hard lives. So they weren't really that bothered by it. Maybe as a testament to the personalities and attitudes of people that live in Rock Springs. They're very tough people, from what I can tell.
Cleanup from the old mines is coming to an end with a project to shore up old coal tunnels under I-80. Well, during Prohibition, rum runner Joe Carey partnered with the First National Bank in Grable to make sure the residents there, including the local cops, the Elks Club, and the pharmacist, still got their liquor. He did so well, he was able to buy the bank building in April 1927 when it failed leading up to the Great Depression. Cowboy State Daily's Jackie Dorothy visited the building, which Carey turned into a hotel, and she spoke to its current owner, Miles Foley, not about the rum running, but about the supposed ghosts that still haunt the halls.
I wouldn't say it was heavily haunted, but it was definitely something there. And down in the speakeasy, just like Miles Foley, the owner, was saying, is that it feels like a cheerful place. There's no oppression, nothing. It just feels like you're back in the 1920s with these people that are enjoying life, not necessarily doing anything really illegal.
Foley said that the spirits that still linger at the Grable Hotel aren't sinister. Laughter has been heard, and those voices from the past still greet patrons of today. The horror of mutilated cattle, cheeks cut off on one side, tongues missing, bloodless carcasses, and no visible signs of predation made big, bold headlines across Wyoming and the West in the mid-1970s. Cowboy State Daily's Dale Killingbeck took a look back at the mysterious, almost otherworldly happenings, and he said that for some folks, the horror of it still hasn't gone away.
For me, the story began when I was in the Air Force back in those days in Colorado, so I remember the headlines. But we just decided just to take a look back at that story to see what relevance it is today. And what surprised me was that there's still cattle mutilations going on. There were some in Oregon and Texas a couple of years ago, talking to the sheriff from the county in southwest Wyoming where he was on the ground. He investigated those mutilations. He said they had evidence of rotor wash. They saw where helicopters had landed. So for him, this story is not about UFOs, but his suspicion was it was something to do with the U.S. government, U.S. military.
The Casper Star-Tribune reported on October 26, 1975, that suspected cattle mutilations surpassed 45 cows, with 10 in Sublette County alone and 16 in Uinta County. Well, if the 1884 walls at Bohemian Metals in Cheyenne could talk, oh, the tales they'd tell. The store's owner, Brian Snyder, has a few remnants of that history, but most of its story seemed destined to remain a mystery until one day, out of the blue, he got a message from a San Diego history buff. Cowboy State Daily's Renee Jean spoke to Mike Hennessy, who traced his grandfather's path back to the period of time between 1865 and 1910, when Abraham Underwood was a mover and shaker in the railroad town of Cheyenne.
Mike Hennessy had dug into some history on one of his ancestors, and the trail led straight to the Bohemian Metals building. And then next door, you've got the steel-looking, kind of modernish 1960s vintage shop that used to all be part of one building. And it was built by the Knights of Pythias, a fellow named Justice A. Underwood. Well, Brian's always known the name A. Underwood, but he didn't know anything about the guy. And so here comes Mike Hennessy with his shopping bag full of old documents from his family and Cheyenne's history.
Underwood history is still being revealed, and it's been fun for both Hennessy and Snyder to fill in some of the blanks about the building and illuminating the story of one of America's early settlers who helped build the West and Cheyenne. And Cody residents Greg and Tammy Poley are trying to find a new home for a cabin sitting on their property along the South Fork Highway near Cody. The ramshackle structure might be a relic from a community submerged over a century ago. But as Cowboy State Daily's Andrew Rossi reports, its history is a mystery.
This cabin possibly came from the community of Marquette, which is basically Wyoming's Atlantis. It was a community that was sitting behind the spot where the Buffalo Bill Dam would be built, and then it was eventually flooded by the Buffalo Bill Reservoir. Old Trail Town, it preserves a lot of historic structures from the early settlement of Cody and the neighboring region, so that seems like it would be the natural place for it. But I spoke with them. It's very easily could have been in Marquette, but they couldn't confirm it, like the brothel that they opened this summer. They can trace the history of the brothel, but this cabin's a little more elusive.
The Poleys say they were told the cabin was the post office for the town of Marquette, but until they find out more about the structure's history, its origins will remain a mystery. And that's today's news. Get your free digital subscription to Wyoming's only statewide newspaper by hitting the daily newsletter button on cowboystatedaily.com. And you can watch this newscast every day by clicking subscribe on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to drop in on the Cowboy State Daily Morning Show with Jake Nichols, Monday through Friday from 6 to 10 a.m. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Wendy Core for Cowboy State Daily.
Show 9:15. Let's get in the Zoom room when Riley Strand's with us. And Riley, the old me would have started off saying, what would possess you to intentionally visit Rock Springs? But the new me, the new and improved me, who doesn't disparage Rock Springs, wants to know what is subsidence and why hasn't Rock Springs collapsed in on itself? That's an interesting story. What really did drive you down there?
Use of Rock Springs and these sinkholes opening up, and it's pretty vague. So I'd go over there and see what was going on. And sure enough, when we got over there, we met up with a historian who told it to us pretty straight that, yeah, there were a bunch of very antique coal mines underneath the town, and they were built in a way that maybe wasn't super future proof. And as a result, the mines collapsed after a certain point in time, and it caused some damage to houses and city hall and that sort of thing. And yeah, so it's real. That actually happened, and not something that you think about living in most places in the United States. But in Rock Springs, that was a big issue. You just didn't know if was there a tunnel under your house? Was it gonna collapse? So yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, and like a lot of things in Wyoming back in the day, and especially in the mining industry, there was no thought about tomorrow. You just do what you had to do today. And coal and the ground it's found in is a little bit softer maybe than some of the, rock hard foundation we're used to in Wyoming. And that's caused a lot. They needed coal, and man, we dug up coal. And Rock Springs was right at the epicenter really of the railroad industry, its need for coal, and then some cheap labor. The massacre we know about with Rock Springs. So there was a lot to, excuse the pun, unearth in Rock Springs with that story. And you got to a bunch of it. That was pretty cool putting that together, that video story and your written story. Really nice.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it went a lot deeper than I thought. And I think it's interesting because in a lot of places, if you go to like Pittsburgh, the fact that they're a steel town, that's a lot of people know that. It's pretty universal. But in Rock Springs, we even stopped a guy. Well, he stopped us on the street and he said, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" And we're doing a story on Rock Springs and its relationship with coal. He's like, "Oh, I didn't know they had coal in Rock Springs." It's like, he's like, "I'd seen the sign, but yeah, I didn't really know that there were a bunch of mines here and that sort of thing." So that was interesting. It's like the next generation has really just forgotten that Rock Springs, that's why it existed really in the first place, is that it was a coal town. Before that, I think there were like 60 people there. So it wasn't really anything on the map. And then when Union Pacific came through, I think their population rose by like 1,000% in the first 6 months or something crazy. So yeah, it's interesting that the younger generation doesn't really seem to know too much about the history there.
And just pretty recently, Interstate 80 had to have a section of it redone because that was driving over some of these places that could collapse. Were you able to like get underground and see any of it? Like so much of this story is under the surface. So how do you really show it on camera? Like what were you able to see that was under the ground?
Yeah, that was the tricky part, is that it's pretty much all been covered up. But to get into any of these tunnels now, you'd have to properly excavate the original entrances that have been completely covered over, because they were pretty thorough in covering the entrances of the mine, because that was the obvious legal issue, is if someone walked into mine shaft and got hurt. So Union Pacific didn't want that. So they shut off the entrances. But then the tunnels were left abandoned, but you can't really get to the tunnels until they collapse. So anything underground, which definitely made it a little hard to tell the story visually. And even the I-80 project finished, I think, like 2 weeks after we got there. But as the administrator of the abandoned mine land division told us, it's not super visually stunning work that they do, because a lot of times they're just sitting above an abandoned mine shaft, drilling holes and filling it with concrete. So a lot of times they themselves don't even go into the mine shaft, and because they don't have to, and for safety and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's a really important story, and it's really important work that they do, but it's really not super like visually stunning. So I think even they sometimes struggle to kind of tell people about it, because it's like, well, what do you show?
Right. And it's really not on anyone's mind until your backyard collapses, until there's a sinkhole in it. And some of them in the story you mentioned, the more minor collapses you can just fix with a backhoe. Some of those, though, you may have explored a shaft that's going way down deep. You got to fill it with grout. Could be an expensive endeavor.
Yeah, it really ranged. There were stories of houses falling into sinkholes. I couldn't find any proper historical record of that, but it seemed to be a pretty common story. The City Hall one was pretty intense when that happened. And it's really actually not even unique to Appalachia. This happens quite a bit. So one thing they did tell me, though, was that the abandoned mine land people was that pre-1977, the regulations that exist today didn't exist. So now this sort of thing really can't happen anymore, because they need to secure the mine as they leave certain spaces and voids. Whereas back then, it was kind of just a free-for-all. Really, the guys were just focused on the workers, were focused on, well, I don't want it to collapse on me, so I'm going to make sure it doesn't collapse while I'm working. But after I leave, I don't really care. But it wasn't negligence. It was just what they knew at the time. And especially in Rock Springs, it's really unique because nowadays mines are outside of town. Maybe there's a man cap at the mine, but you don't live on top of the mine. Well, in Rock Springs, these guys didn't have transportation. There's no public transit. So if they wanted to go work in the mine, they would have to build their house right next to the mine entrance, which then undercut their house with a tunnel. So it was just really kind of this perfect storm of old mining practices. These people didn't have transportation, so they had to live on top of the mines. That led to this situation that happened in the 80s, 90s, and today to some extent.
Yeah, good point. I didn't think of that, but yeah, most of your old mining towns, like the mine shaft is, a mile down the road, and the town and the saloons are all there. But in the case of Rock Springs, it is built on some precarious ground. We're talking to Cowboy State Daily videographer Riley Strand. Riley, in mind, Halloween's coming.
Yeah, we're working on a story with Mark Hines about the Civic Center in Laramie. So I'm editing that one this week. So that'll be out sometime early this week. We're kind of exploring if that place is haunted. We teamed up with some paranormal investigators to see. So that's an interesting one. After that, there's a list on my list and see what's next. But yeah, there's plenty to explore for sure.
And just for the techie people out there, what kind of camera do you use to capture those ghost images or the paranormal. Like we seen those shows where they have some kind of heat sensor. I don't know. You got a special camera that picks up ghosts?
Yeah, luckily, I'd never used it until now. Reason to. One of my cameras can pick up infrared, so we set up an infrared camera and we used that to see what we could find. But these investigators used mostly audio devices. They used some lights that would light up if a ghost was nearby, theoretically. So yeah, quite the range of equipment. But yeah, apparently my camera is a ghost hunting camera if you press a certain button. So that was cool.
I put it in ghost hunting mode. Nice. All right. Thanks, Riley, for stopping by. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good rest of your show.
Yeah, thanks. I look forward to being scared by Riley. Just of Riley and Mark together. That's scary enough, but it'll be interesting to see how that story turns out. Cowboy State Daily Morning Show with Jake, and we're going to turn our sights now to our next item, which I think is going to be, I don't know, I actually haven't thought that far ahead. Yeah, let's do our Don Day updated weather forecast, and then we'll switch gears to the next story for the morning. Thanks for spending your morning with us this Monday morning on the Cowboy State Daily
Winter weather advisories and winter storm watches Monday, October 28th, 2024. Your day weather forecast brought to you by Converse County Tourism. Douglas and Glen Rock, Wyoming are bustling with action this holiday season. Plan your excursion, including fun activities, beautiful downtowns, and historic treasures. Learn more at conversecountytourism.com. Well, we finally got something to talk about. Over the course of the weekend, some high-level moisture began to stream into the region, as evidenced by a lot of the photos you'll see here in a moment, making for some beautiful sunrises and sunsets. This is all due to a big change going on in the western United States, the eastern Pacific, and the western United States. It's going to bring about a strong Pacific cold front pushing into the region. So what we're going to see is not necessarily what we'd call a Colorado low or Four Corners low. This whole event is all about positioning and timing of when the cold air, the moisture, and strong jet stream winds all kind of converge at once is where the heaviest precipitation is going to fall. And it's going to be in a southwest to northeast band. If you're directly under that, you're going to get significant moisture and significant winter weather. If you're on the edges, well, you'll be on the edges and you won't get as much. And that axis of moisture, the combination of things could wiggle a little bit back and forth. This will bring certainly travel impacts to hunters and travelers. You'll see here in a moment where we're going to see significant snow in the mountains of Utah, Colorado, Wyoming State, so hunters be advised. Now, the pattern's going to stay active. There's a lot of disagreement in the models after this system, so kind of stay tuned, but the weather's going to stay busy as we get into the weekend, as we get into election week and beyond. Beautiful photos coming in. We have a lot of high-level moisture, winds aloft increasing. We're getting more lenticular clouds, and that is making for some wonderful photo opportunities, whether it's sunrise and lander or even during the day. As you can see there in Lovell with that high-level moisture coming on in, but just beautiful opportunities for a lot of color in the clouds across the region this weekend, from Nebraska to Wyoming and all places in between. And yes, another great shot from Jan Curtis of Comet A3 as it continues to climb higher and higher and gets a little bit more, well, just fading away very slowly here in the coming days. A lot of this going on across the region, trying to get harvest in before the weather changes. Good opportunity for really another good day for harvest opportunities before things really begin to change. Now, throughout the west, you see all that purple there? The purple indicates winter storm watches. The pink, winter storm warnings. This pink and brown here due to red flag warnings and advisories for very high fire danger. But you can see in this whole area right here, there's going to be significant winter weather with this Pacific front. And to focus in on Wyoming, those are the areas where you see the blue shading. Now, keep in mind, it doesn't mean there won't be winter weather in areas that don't have this. But this is where the current watches and advisories and warnings are out for winter weather. Notice the Black Hills of South Dakota and Wyoming have a winter storm watch in effect. That's an area that I think is really going to be impacted. We'll show you that here in a second. The satellite imagery this morning doesn't look like much. It really doesn't. But as we'll show you here in a minute, it's the alignment of several weather variables working together to get things going. Here's the lenticular clouds forming along and east of the Continental Divide as that moisture comes over. What we have here, you see this? There is a connection. We talked about that dissipating hurricane in the Pacific. There is some connection to that moisture from the remains of that hurricane getting drawn into the western United States. The trough of low pressure and the real cold air is back here. So it really doesn't look like much. And this, well, this looks a little more interesting, but a lot of this is just high level moisture. This is going to get added with this. You can see it a little bit better on the water vapor. The water vapor loop shows the deeper moisture coming up here. And here's moisture, but also cold air coming in with the trough coming in from the northwest. So there's a merger, so to speak, elements coming together. And where you are, where they come together, is going to dictate what's going to happen with the precipitation. So as of 6 a.m. this morning, that trough coming into Oregon and Washington, the moisture we showed you on the satellite imagery is forming right along this wind gradient aloft here, this pressure gradient between the high and the low here. That's moisture streaming in. Cold air is coming in behind this trough like this. This is where we're going to be by noon tomorrow. The upper level low is going to be about near Salt Lake City. So you can see it pushing in. And that moisture and the cold air from the Pacific Northwest will come over and into basically that cold air slips underneath that warmer, moist air coming in aloft, and there's basically a collision coming together. The winds aloft this morning, you can see strong winds aloft at 300 millibars at 30 trough and out on the backside. This wind here will help draw the trough south. This will help take that moisture and push it northeast. And so what ends up happening is we have a strong temperature gradient aligning from the southwest to the northeast. Now, this is by 6 p.m. Mountain Time tomorrow. These numbers here, this is called a thickness chart. What I want you to realize or take note here of is the warmer looking temperatures, warmer looking colors are warmer temperatures, and the higher numbers represent warmer temperatures. The lower numbers represent colder temperatures. So cold and the warm going on basically in the southwest to northeast axis just like this by 6 p.m. tomorrow. So it's pretty darn warm down here on the plains. It is a whole lot colder in Montana and parts of the Northwest Rockies. In between, the strong jet stream winds aloft are streaking over through on top of it. So there's the cold air gradient at the bottom, and there you can see the temperature anomaly by 6 p.m. tomorrow. There's the cold. The center of it is right there. The better moisture, the precipitable water, is lining up right on top, right over where that stronger temperature gradient is. Then on top of that, there's the strong winds aloft that we showed you moving overhead by Tuesday morning and throughout the day Tuesday. Strong jet stream winds aloft will be right over here. And notice everything is aligning from the southwest to the northeast. The winds aloft, the precipitation, and that's where you're going to see the axis of the heavier moisture. So this is where it all is coming together. The strongest is right along this line, and on either side of the line is where the heavier axis of moisture will be. The strong winds aloft will drive heavy snow into the mountains of southwest Colorado. Underneath this axis right here is where we're going to have the heaviest snowfall, and that's where you're going to have the biggest travel impacts. So if you're in that boundary right there, you're going to get the most winter weather and the coldest, most unsettled weather. Just outside of this oval I showed you, you're on the edges. So you're on the edge here, and you're going to be on the edge right here. But if you're underneath everything, now keep in mind, all of this could move a little more north or it could move a little bit more south. But I think this persistent area right here, where just the best lining up of everything coming together, will be in place. Now, once the jet stream winds move away from that area, this area will dissipate rapidly and head off to the east. So it's not an upslope storm. It's not a four corners low. It's a combination of things working together. And there's where your snowfall is most likely going to be. I think the Black Hills will see their first significant snow of the season. And again, there's that axis right there, but the mountains, all the mountain ranges are going to get into a good southwest flow aloft where there's good moisture to be able to bring in some significant high country snow to the area. Now, by Thursday morning, by Halloween morning, that low really weakens and heads off to the northeast, so the precipitation will weaken. Now, there's a lot of disagreement on what happens with this guy. So this is the next weather maker. It could slide just like this. It could slide all the way down into here. Don't know yet. But this is going to end up being a player in our forecast later on. Certainly, it's going to bring more wet, cold weather to the Pacific Northwest. By Sunday, the European model wants to take it and push it all the way down to the south and have it settle into the southwestern United States by the weekend. And by election week, this system may actually curve back north, and there may be a little bit of a merger of this system with this system. So stay tuned, but certainly with the high in the Pacific, eastern Pacific now, lows are going to be able to come into the west. It just depends on where they go and how they go afterwards. This is by Monday, and that southwestern United States low, again, there may be a little bit of these two coming together around Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. So there's a lot more to talk about. Also to talk about this, we do have a geomagnetic storm. There was another coronal mass ejection that hit Earth last night. However, with all the weather coming on through, I don't think we're going to have an opportunity to see any auroras, at least here for the next couple of nights. Have yourself a good Monday. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Don. His full weather forecast on the 9 o'clock hour. We've got weather this week. We have new details emerging from the fatality of Grizzly 399, the accident in the Snake River Canyon. According to the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office and a statement issued, we find out one interesting piece of information that has previously not been released. The motorist apparently told authorities that he swerved to avoid one bear only to make contact with another bear. So presumably the motorist swerved, saw the cub Spirit, and swerved to avoid hitting the cub and hit the most famous grizzly bear on the planet. So I guess in a way, Grizz 399, who was known throughout her life for being such a mother to her cubs, it was her life for the cubs' life, as at least that was the report from the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office. Motorists swerved to avoid hitting the cub and hit Grizz 399. The accident was such that the Subaru involved in the collision, the airbag was deployed. Sheriff deputies arrived at about 11:22 p.m. First responders on the scene were deputy and first responders. A call came from a motorist. There's a very sketchy, if any, cell service in that canyon. So a passerby saw the accident and was able to call when he or she got a cell phone signal. But no signs of impairment, distracted driving, or activity were observed. According to law enforcement, the amount of damage observed was consistent with a vehicle collision with an animal at the posted speed. So, again, the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office report confirms that it was just an accident, purely an accident. Story in the Jackson Hole News and Guide today quotes Lincoln County Sheriff's Office Patrol Lieutenant John Steitzenbach saying it was truly an accident. Those things do happen with the wildlife that we have here in Wyoming. It was not the driver in a careless manner or in a distracted manner. Therefore, the sheriff's office will not identify the driver. That has been so much hate mail, said Lieutenant Steitzenbach, so much hate mail out there against the driver that we are not going to release his name. Jackson Hole News and Guide story, following up with a Lincoln County Sheriff's Office report that information we did not know, at least I did not know until today, that the motorist in a statement said he swerved to avoid the cub and struck the mother, Grizz 399. At the time, the motorist bear was, or which bear was which, he just said he swerved to avoid hitting one bear and hit another. And Grizz 399 was found nearby in the roadside ditch. It was believed she died, if not instantly, very quickly. She was identified by ear tags, a lip tattoo, and of course, when Game and Fish came onto the scene, they were able to identify the bear as Grizz 399. So interesting information that we didn't previously know. Let's go to Pinedale and then Powell. Beginning with Pinedale, this story from the publicnewsservice.org, Sarah Jane Tribble did the reporting along with Kathleen Shannon. Pinedale's getting something that bucks the trend across the nation when rural hospitals are closing everywhere, and up to an estimated half of rural hospitals in America are losing money every year and closing. Pinedale is going to see one open here pretty soon. Next year in 2025, the rural community of Pinedale, Wyoming, population of about 2,000 in the heart of Sublette County. Sublette County does not have, it's the only county in Wyoming that does not have a hospital. And finally, one is being built, a rural hospital in Pinedale, a 10-bed, 40,000 square foot hospital is slated to open by summer of 2025, and it'll be a first hospital for Pinedale, and kind of a grand opening that bucks the trend nationwide, where most rural hospitals are struggling financially and closing. They'll open one in Pinedale next summer, so that's good news for the folks in Sublette County. Up in Powell, Wyoming, they're still trying to figure out whether they want to rename their college Northwest College. The idea to rename Northwest College to Yellowstone College is still on the table. Roughly 1,500 people weighed in a recent survey, and a sizable majority are against renaming. A sizable majority, including many of the alumni, oppose a change to Yellowstone College. Trustee John Housel reopened the idea of renaming the institution, believing the marketing benefits far outweigh the challenges. Challenges of any woman can tell you who's been married who changes her last name to her husband's name. It's a lot to rename yourself, and it's a lot to rename a college. Just think about all the materials that have Northwest College on them. You got to redo all that. But would Northwest College as a brand name, does that really play outside of the state of Wyoming? And some say not really. Enrollment could be seriously boosted with a name change to Yellowstone College, but most of the people in the Powell area surveyed recently said they're against the name change. Just a couple of stories we're following on this Monday, 9:43, 17 in front of the hour. It's the Cowboy State Daily Morning Show with Jake, and we'll be right back with more, including a recap of this morning's stories, and we'll throw in some sports just for a bonus. I love Renee's story. Renee Jean about Daryl Orr, the guy who lost his job as a meteorologist. We asked Don Day earlier this morning, what happens when this whole weather thing doesn't work out anymore, you know? You got a plan B, you got something to fall back on, because he thought he'd be a meteorologist forever. He worked for a Denver television station as their weather guy. One day he was abruptly fired. They said, your position has been erased. We're not going to go with the weather guy anymore. There was no warning, Daryl said, and what set in was shell shock and panic. For another job, found out he was terribly overqualified for everything. That happens a lot when you're in midlife and you have to make a pivot with your employment. He applied to a whole bunch of places and they all told him the same thing. You're overqualified. So then the only thing he could really see that would work financially for he and his family, and he asked his wife, he said, I'm thinking about becoming a truck driver. And his wife said, no way. Are you driving truck? You'll be away from the home so much. He was thinking about being an over-the-road trucker, 345 days on the road. But the pay was good. Daryl Orr, it would be a major life change. How do you go from being a weatherman to a truck driver? I guess it can be done. Our own Renee Jean talked to Wendy Core about the story and about how Daryl Orr, Denver area meteorologist, made the switch to 18.
One-time Denver TV reporter Daryl Orr lost his job unexpectedly in midlife. He wasn't worried until he couldn't get another job in his field because everyone kept telling him he was overqualified. So the Cheyenne man decided to do something completely different. Cowboy State Daily's Renee Jean reports that Orr took to the road, becoming a long-haul truck driver.
He just kept getting, you're overqualified, sorry, you're overqualified, everywhere he went for like a year and a half. Finally, when he got kind of thinking outside the box, what can I do that's going to have this much salary so I can make ends meet? And that's when he noticed all these truck driving ads. Everybody's hiring truck drivers. There was a lot to learn, a lot of names. You have to do an inspection twice a day of your truck. So there's a lot to remember, but he's making more than he was before, probably more than he would ever get to in a media job. He hasn't given up storm chasing. He loved the meteorology gigs. He's turned that into kind of a hobby. He does little videos in his downtime.
Midlife job losses are tough, Orr said, and they can be harrowing experiences. But with persistence and an open mind, they can have a happy ending.
Yeah, salute to Daryl Orr. Truck driving fool.
Here I sit, all alone with a broken heart.
The most impressive part about being able to just change gears, excuse the pun, from meteorologist to gear jammer, the most impressive part of the story is Daryl Orr's acknowledgement that, being a truck driver is maybe not the healthiest thing as far as your lifestyle. It's a lot of seat time and a lot of fast food, but he's done things intentionally to live a healthy life. He cooks his from scratch. He's got an air fryer in his truck cab, and he tries to avoid best he can fast food at truck stops and tries to eat healthy. He also tries to exercise every day before he gets in his truck for that long haul. He goes for a long walk to make sure he's in tip-top shape. Where to go, Daryl Orr, and he's never able to put the weather laboratory behind, meteorology studio with all his computer models, his police scanners. He's got his whole truck rigged out, his cab of his truck with all kinds of devices he still uses to forecast weather. It'll always be his past paying the bills for Daryl Orr. Great story from Renee Jean. We'll talk to her tomorrow about That and many more. Renee was busy over the weekend pumping out stories, haunted stories. We got a few of those as well as we move towards Halloween. Sweetwater Library over a cemetery, and many of those graves were moved, but not all of them. And there is unrest underneath the Sweetwater County Library. Librarian Mickey Gilmore will tell you she's heard it, felt it. Lights flicker on and off, books thrown to the floor, whisper when nobody's around. Very creepy. She's written a book about it. She did the research. She wanted to know, am I truly working in a haunted place? So she researched it and found out the full scoop, enough scoop that she was able to write her own book about the experience. Read about that in the Cowboy State Daily. All right, the cat's got to go outside, and we're almost to 10 o'clock, but he's not going to make it. I'm going to have to throw this thing outside. Stand by. We'll be right back after this quick break on the Cowboy State Daily Morning Show. So much to catch up on over the weekend. Stories you may have missed. Cowboy State Daily Morning Show with Jake. There's coffee clatches to catch up with. The Gillette Old Farts Society. Yeah, they meet weekly at a place called The Local. Just a bunch of old guys talking taxes. And that's not the only coffee clutch we found over the weekend, but Jen Coker was able to find these guys at the local coffee shop downtown Gillette. Coffee clutch as we move into the final week of election campaigning. One more week, you've got to hear the rhetoric, and then we finally get to settle everything and go vote. Also, stories over the weekend that you may have missed. Yellowstone says it's going to remove 1,375 bison. Some say it should be more, not less. Others say that it's a unscientifically unsound way to manage bison because the bison are confined basically to Yellowstone. They're not allowed to drift outside the park, so that's not good for the genetic pool. The gene pool is poor because of that, but Park Service sees no other way. They target at 6,000 max bison, and they were at about 6,000 going back to August. So the Yellowstone Bison Program Manager, Chris Jeremia, suggested the removal of some 1,300 bison in order to get into that target range of where they believe the population should be. And different methods are used to collect these bison, to get the bison out of Yellowstone. 3 methods include making the bison available for state and tribal harvest outside the park, or some bison are placed in a bison conservation transfer that want or need bison, or they're donated to the tribal food transfer program where they become bison burgers. But bison on the way out of Yellowstone, a little more than 1,300, as Yellowstone National Park authorities try to get in the manageable range. But the cull of the herd is not without protests. There's a group, Claire McFarland has a story, a group in Fremont County that wants to kill a tax that raises money to spur. Some folks in Fremont County say it's time to get rid of the tax. Axe the tax movement has been underway for a while now. Even though residents and visitors have benefited from $14.7 million of tax money that's gone into the economic development and transportation services. This tax has been around since April of 21. There are many unhappy with the tax, particularly what it targets, where the money is spent. State Senator Cal Case, Republican Lander, has been one of the more vocal members. The legislator said there's an overall problem with subsidizing private business with government funds. Government has programs all the time. I know that. But this is very specific and very targeted and very wrong. It's based on the sort of faulty feeling that government can do a better job spending your money than you can. Are they ready to axe the tax at this November 5th election in Fremont County? We'll find out. These stories and more are what we rounded up for you on the Cowboy State Daily Morning Show. Hope you enjoyed everything this morning, and we're going to roll out of here.
In the morning, Cowboy State Daily.
That'll do it for us. We'll see you tomorrow bright and early, 6 a.m. on the Cowboy State Daily Morning Show. Good morning. This is the Cowboy State Daily Morning Show with Jake. The new way Wyoming wakes up.
The views and opinions expressed on the Cowboy State Daily Morning Show are solely those of its host and do not necessarily represent those of Cowboy State Daily's reporters, editors,